indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing for a moment of silence. Chief.
Take a moment to remember the 2 firefighters and 7 police officers that have passed since our last board meeting.
Thank you. Please be seated. Okay. Today we have the privilege of starting out our meeting with a workshop that has to do with the policies of the Sedona Fire District. Trying to get a handle over what is and what isn't current, applicable, create a document for the board that is complete with those policies that really pertain to the operation of the board. Albeit all policies are the responsibility of the board. So with that said, as an introduction, Chief, I'll go ahead and give you the floor to let us know what you've done to date.
Thank you, and welcome to our first policy workshop. So I want to start off by thanking Kim for putting in quite a bit of work on based on the conversations we had, and essentially I took something out of the playbook that I do on another board I'm on, and whether it works or not for us is to be determined, but the process is essentially this. It's called first read, second read, and the intent today was to just a global introduction to this particular piece that we worked on, and then which would be first read, and then final formatting and everything based on feedback from the board, with a couple edits over the next couple weeks, and then next board meeting would essentially be review of policies 2024 1 through 10. Is everybody okay with all edits and addendums? If so, all in favor, and make a motion. And the second read typically is a formality, and it's a 2-minute process. So we'll see how it works. But there's some formatting to complete on the policies, but what Kim really worked to do is condense to what made sense to us as far as some of the board policies. As you know, like 95-1, I believe it is, was a 1 paragraph, and I'm like, what, why, and in addition to that, an attempt was made with the fire board handbook to really make it a handbook, and then reflect the statute, the rules, if you will, instead of the handbook in multiple places referencing the rules that are next in the handbook. Have overall process and then the rules. So with that, it's open to discussion. The thought process was, as you can see here, policy 2024-1, just make them sequential for the board policies, and in the handbook, the attempt was made to condense it and really separate the rules section from the handbook content, if that makes sense. And I believe that meets most of the intended feedback from board members, but that's why we're here today, to get more and keep pushing forward.
Well, with that, Chief, I suppose we ought to identify what this handbook really is and how it's divided up. Sounds to me that and it seems to me, it didn't sound to me, but it seems to me that in discussion with some of the board members, it's divided up into basically 3 sections. One is that statutory elements that we receive training on every time we go to the conference, as well as from the Office of the Ombudsman. Secondly, there's a section on rules, 1 through 30-ish, I think 30. And then there's the policies that are a mishmash of what we have, whereas you have condensed some of them. And what I see before me right now is a condensing of this particular policy 2024-01, if you look at the last page, it replaces 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different policies that you've combined into one. That is something that I'm looking for, maybe that of other board members also, but there may be other things that we're looking for also. So with that said, just the structure of the board's handbook may be a good place to start. Do we want a board that has a manual that has the 3 sections, a manual that is broken down? The problem that we have and have had over the years is that when there's a correction, a change, a modification, an addendum, it may affect 1, 2, or all 3 of those sections. And so if you've addressed that, then we're starting off on the right foot.
I believe so, and thankfully, generally speaking, most of the changes are generated from statute changes, you know, and so they may add rules.
First statement that I made, I think there's other board members that have input that would be helpful about our concerns. So who would like to open up?
Well, I would like to.
Okay, Helen?
So my concern, I've got several global concerns, but the most important one is that after the first 2 or 3 pages, it goes into the operation of the board. And everything that's there is a redundancy with what's in the rules of procedure, which come from statutes and whatever. So I'm saying, why do we have that first section? Why don't we just have the rules of procedure? If there's anything that we need, like there's a page that has, here's the first things that board members need to do, that should be there. But then the rules of procedure have more detail, and then we're not in the place where if we make a change, as Chairman Soto pointed out, we're having to make sure we change it both places.
No, that makes sense, and the intent of this initial retool was, from past experience, we have a new board, and the past board wanted more detail and redundancy, and I agree with you. It's why outline what's in rules in the preamble. I think the preamble, in the fire world, we call it a quick hit. You know, you get to a house fire and you do a quick hit with water to knock it down, and the handbook should be a quick hit, just an overview, here's getting started tutorial, and then once you have a basic understanding of board function foundationally, then you get in the minutia of the rules, and you can get into the details. And I think for me personally, simpler is better. And I just want to reiterate, like, the kind of direction of staff was not to go too far, but make changes based on the recommendations as a first read, as a first blush, so that we could bring those edits. And this workshop, this hour, will be the first part of our edits going forward, and then we can wash that and then move forward. So, and I'm taking lots of notes.
Well, I don't know that you want to go, if you want, I can go through page by page, but I'm happy to pass my notes to Kim. The other large comment I have is that I think when we're done with all the changes, because this document has been edited 6 ways a Sunday by different people with different levels of expertise on formatting a document and using Word and creating tables of contents and things like that. So I think it'd be advisable when we're done to have someone who's really capable with Word, and that may be Kim or someone else, go through and really crack up the formatting so that things are the same and it all hangs together that way. And
well, the final document will be washed. It was anticipated that there would be numerous changes made to these proposed documents, so that formatting wasn't the ultimate concern, but that's.
So, and the only other thing I would say is there are some language changes and things, but I will give this to you or to Kim, because I've gone through it and put everything in comments.
Perfect.
Corey, do you have points to make?
Yes, oh, thank you. So following up on, Board Member Helen's comments that there's redundancy, but sometimes then when one gets changed, it doesn't get changed in a different section. The main thing I noticed was, in the beginning part of what the board shall do, and then additional duties, legal responsibilities, and then finally best practices. Nowhere in there does it say that the board is responsible for policy. The word policy isn't used in any of those opening pages. And yet later on, it definitely mentions under powers, like on page 22, that we need to approve policies. So I think that's something that's fairly important, since that's the whole subject of our meeting, is to check with Mr. Whittington. And Mr. Whittington, it's true that the board is responsible for policies. Would that be under a shall? Would that be under additional duties or best practices?
You're legally responsible.
Legally responsible.
You can delegate authority to whatever extent you decide is.
And we
For instance, you can
delegate that.
delegate to the fire chief any kind of authority you would otherwise keep to yourselves, or you can hold it all close to your chest and not delegate any of it. That's all your discretion.
Very good. It would be nice to have that up front then, I think. And then I can, just like Helen's going to do, I can send over to Kim a couple of other additions where they're mentioned in one section, like board clerk duties to approve referenda and minutes. It's mentioned in one section, but it's missing under board clerk duties. So there's ways to maybe consolidate would be a really good way to go.
So is it safe to say that the rules should contain the rules and the handbook should just contain the basics of the handbook, the intro, if you will, the quick start guide?
Information that supplements the rules, doesn't repeat the rules, and when there's a section that needs to reference the rules or the duties, that section is referenced versus spelling it out again, so that when you change that section, you don't have to go back and find all the different places it was referenced. I think is what I just heard from the collector.
Yeah.
I think in its inception, 9 or 10 years ago, the board wanted a book to go to, a book that had all the answers, a book that we didn't have to figure out, does this book have just the rules? Does it have just the policies? Does it have the statutory items? And in doing so, we put together this book that since then has created a dilemma that we have before us, in that not been kept up, and all the other problems that we just mentioned a moment ago. So kind of taking a step back, perhaps, as Chief Coyle just mentioned, the ability to reference rather than to state that policy or procedure to that particular book, and going back to 2 volumes or even maybe 3. You know, nobody wants more stuff, but if that's what it takes, so we can be specific, then that's maybe that's the direction we need to go.
If I could ask a question to the previous one, so Kim and I go back and forth, we landed on all those words, but where to start, because we had some of it condensed down to like a paragraph. But the original ones, they were very paternalistic. Like a lot of like, don't do this, and frankly, that just it read wrong too. But that's how it was.
Thou shalt.
Yeah, I mean,
I think that's critical, because that's how we grew up. You shall do this and you shall not do that. And that's what we understood, but times have changed. And I think what you're explaining is something that we need to adjust to.
as long as you're good with it, then that helps a lot, because that was one of the things that was how much of this, don't do this bad thing with the tablet does people need? If they just use it for official use and your official duties, that seemed to.
We have had a board, though, that actually needed rules like that because they,
Remember, yeah.
yeah, so that's maybe where some of those came from, because that board was a bit ridiculous.
I'm sure there's reasons for it. It just, it to me at least, it didn't speak professionalism.
Right, it made us sound like we don't have professional.
Yeah, it's like, hey, now don't you dare, do this with your, it's like,
It
sounds,
me too, though, that if we focus on the rules of procedure and making sure that that's clean and crisp and understandable, then to me, whatever goes in front of that, vision, the history, that's all fine. But then there's a page that has like the quick start. But the quick start should end by referring people to please be sure to read the rules of,
Rules, yeah,
and not do, yeah.
crazy concept.
Scott, do you have anything to add to that? Any other comments?
Not at this time.
Okay. Okay, with that being said, Chief, you've, if there's more that you need to add to what you've already stated, please do so, but was it your intent to go through each one of these as a first reading at today's meeting?
I didn't have an intent, honestly, specific to that. I just wanted to present the kind of the three-part and conceptually ensure that we are tracking the direction the board wants to go. And then we can put in the work for formatting and tightening up and everything. There was a lot of movement within these documents. And so before we got further down the road and kind of advisement to staff was today, first read, my intent isn't to deliver finished product because that makes no sense to me. The finished product can't happen without your inputs. So, with time, we've got the time allocated to go through these and maybe highlight anything specific.
Let me interject this. You mentioned a system of first readings and second readings and then motions to approve. Is that the method that we want? A first reading, a second, and when do we want these second and, readings to be? Are they going to be at monthly intervals, at workshops prior to a meeting, or?
Well, and here's for clarity's sake, the other world I live in is the school board, and same deal, statutory changes and recommendations from the Arizona School Board Association. And so, first read provides us an opportunity to, hear from the superintendent, hey, this one's straight up a law, there's no conversation about it, it's a change to statute, or this one is a recommendation based on the diversity and inclusion criteria that's being recommended by the feds. And so that one has some gray area. So my thought process was first read, second read is we have the bulk of the conversation about content or reformatting, and then there's an opportunity, we'll take what edits you provide tonight, submit to the group, get feedback, and the intent would be to bring the final product next month. You'd have it beforehand to review the final edits, and then the second read is literally 2 minutes. It's any questions, no questions, all in favor, and then it moves on. But you would have that month, and the idea is to have a lot of the tough conversations about it during this workshop, because the other way we could do it is we get it to you, we come here with all the edits. Either way works. This second read piece works in the other world I live in, and I thought give it a go. And I don't have a preference to your point.
Chief, I'll say from my perspective, I like your proposed first read, second read with one amendment.
Okay.
Really helps me to be able to get these in advance.
Okay, that's the other question I wanted to ask, because in advance, like what do you feel is an appropriate time frame, or is it a week out?
5 days to a week,
Okay.
especially since we have the rest of the packet to read. And
Well, I want to be respectful of your time, and some people operate better under the "if I get it the day before" mantra, and right, Scott? And others, I understand, but that's what this experiment is about, is getting to a process flow, and then it may even shorten second read even further if that. So Duly noted.
A first and a second, a first reading with revisions back to the chief.
Right.
They review it, incorporate it, send it back out to us for a second reading.
Yeah.
If there are revisions to that, they gotta go back, or if they are accepted as presented, then at that following meeting, we could then move to approve or.
Yeah.
In my experience, second read is never generated, the process is complete, second read is never generated oh gosh, we gotta change this again. And kind of my thought process is, as we go through these policies and procedures, the next workshop, the first 3 minutes are second read, and then you jump right into the next group batch of policies. But, so it wouldn't impact our intent to go through these policies, but it would just create a different format to try.
I think what may concern me is that we send them back to you for revision after all the first reading. And you get them and you incorporate these revisions except one or two, and one of those might have been mine. So wait a minute, my revision's not in here. Why not?
Well,
You know, so I'm trying to figure out how do we, because we can't talk to each other in fear of violation of open meeting laws.
so tonight, two board members have indicated they've got edits. So we incorporate those, ship it out to the group, get a thumbs up or a tweak this or this, revise it, send it back out to the group. So there'd be an opportunity, depending on the complexity of the policy or the procedure, there'd be an opportunity for endless feedback, but ultimately one or two shots at it. And I would argue we'd probably be able to capture intent of the board in totality and then move forward. But you won't submit your edits tonight and then we ship it out to you and, okay, here's the done product for next month. You look through it and you're like, oh wait, my thing wasn't in there. And then you could just go direct. And then, you know, kind of the first shot out goes to all the board members, and, you know, two board members shoot back, I'm good with edits. One says, I want this changed, and the other two are like, yeah, I agree with, and then it ships back out. So it's a little bit of back and forth, but generally speaking, it's not gonna be that complex.
Yeah, if once a week, so that would allow for 3 of them, right,
Yeah.
in between. If weekly, the edits that are received are incorporated and then sent back out to the board, and then the board makes sure and sends their edits in directly to Kim, then that would give 3 chances before the 1 week out on a regular board meeting to make, you know, iterative changes to the document, and it wouldn't be going back and forth between y'all.
Yeah.
So I think, Mr. Whittington, as long as they send the information back to Kim, Kim aggregates the information and sends out the new draft version of the document to the entire group, and then they send it back to Kim, is that okay?
That's not in violation of communicating outside of an open meeting.
So that would allow for 3 iterations before.
And so it was stated earlier that a 5-day turnaround, and let's just assume we work on Tuesdays because today's Tuesday. By next Tuesday, our edits for this first read would be back to Kim or back to staff. Staff regurgitates all this, sends it back out to us by the following Tuesday, of which it comes back that third Tuesday. So that when it does get finally put together, we'll be at the next meeting.
Yeah, and
Does that sound like what we're talking about?
well, and practically speaking, this first run will be a little more labor intensive because the product we provided is less than finished on purpose because we wanted to get feedback from the board. But once the process is established, it's difficult for me to believe that it'd go beyond one kickback. It'd be first read, there'd be a kickback for edit, and then it'd be ready for the next board meeting, from my experience. This first one will be a little more labor intensive, but going forward, it won't be, just from my experience.
And if it's still going back and forth, then we can just table it until the next board meeting too. You know what I mean? If there's still things that need to be changed or whatever.
Yeah, 'cause I think in this first reading, and taking this first document here of policy 2024-01, not only are we going to read it, but we want to check it against
Condensed.
what it is replacing. You know, and that's,
Right.
that's just, and there's quite a few of them, so that's gonna take a little bit of time until we refine the process.
But that, and ironically or purposefully, the 24-01 is the one that I think had the most condensing. So that'll be like the toughest one to aggregate. But other than that, they're all pretty.
All right,
And then, just one more thing, because one of our policies, in the book is to review the handbook every year by August. And I'm just wondering if every year is really needed, and would biannually make more sense every 2 years?
every year it's announced, and every year there's always one or two items. But it hasn't gone beyond that, and input by all board members is important, but it doesn't always happen. So I don't think that establishes the fact that, well, let's just put it off and do it biannually or every other year. But to establish a means of doing it so that we know it's coming up and we know we're gonna review it. This particular year may not have a need for it because we're going through it, so it's pretty doggone clear.
Well, and I could prepare a canned statement for the board annually. You know, next month we're open for handbook review. There have been no changes to statute or rules, and no other recommendations from legal. And then start with that, and you say, okay, all is good.
I mean, something as simple as meetings from Thursday to Tuesday that happened a while back was throughout the book that we needed to change, and it was a slow change. So with that said, with what we have here today, it's gonna, I mean, you may want to go and just introduce what they are, and that might take the remaining, 20 minutes, so that we could then go back and do our first reading. Okay, just kind of give us an introduction of what these are. And we could read, but what was your intent on doing what you did?
Well, we're not required, if I'm not mistaken, we're not required for the agenda to soak up the whole hour. So,
Well,
and I'm not attempting to skirt anything, but it's at the pleasure of the board, how you want to.
I would say let's go through these, just from your point of view on what you've done, what the highlights are that strike you. And because this is the first time I've seen this document, and I'm not going to judge on it at all today.
No, understood.
I think Zoom just went down again, so we might wanna, however that factors in. Joshua! I'll text him.
Thank you.
I feel pretty good on the direction we're going so far.
Oh,
I have sticky questions.
What's that? Oh, I was gonna knock on his window.
That's good.
So I'm going to.
Yeah.
I tried to give you a heads up when I'm gonna do something.
What's the board, does it call this a workshop?
No.
Now I know.
I just.
You know, when Ed gets back, you guys can decide how to deal with this. But this is all under a regular board meeting, so we don't have to spend any more time talking about this stuff in here than we want. I thought it was under a workshop, we're gonna have to stop and start and at the right time, but it's not.
Yeah. But as long as we get through what we want.
That was our hero.
Yeah, we should try and at least decide what we have to do.
It's not under, it's.
Thank God this could be considered a disability.
Well, people, so, when we operational, of course, is the first reading, we didn't discuss first reading. When we after, swear we didn't touch a thing.
Wi-Fi's still working.
No one even moved. Not even. When we,
Heard a buzz call.
no one even moved. I was definitely sitting there. Beyond the, that won't happen. Yeah, but at least in. I should intend to bring it.
Okay, you wanna start from the beginning?
That's why I hesitate to bring up sexual rights.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, that's it. and I put that here, I put reference laws, spell out regulations, define,
Five, yeah.
recommend,
Yeah.
avoid debate.
This
Maybe six.
approved.
So,
Arizona, it probably isn't.
Are we ready?
if I could summarize something, and then maybe we'll be in a good spot. So, for what, everything that was said, what I heard as far as the intent, board direction, scope of the effort should avoid paternalistic language, avoid cross-referencing information. Instead, when needed, refer to the section that contains the needed information, so we don't have duplicity and that we mess up and don't cut something out. Ensure an editor with the necessary skills does the final edits. Reference laws, spell out the regulations, define processes, recommend preferred approach, avoid duplication. So that's, you know, if it hits those hierarchies from that way, then if it's in the top two, we don't need to spell it in the third two because it's a regulation or it's a law. And then provide policies for review 1 week out. And the process there would be 1 week prior to the board meeting, send out policies for first read to the board. The board meeting, we discuss the first read, and then after, you know, shortly thereafter, get the comments back to Kim. 1 week after that board meeting, the comments have been incorporated and they're back out to the board members. And then 2 weeks after the board meeting, board members return any additional comments they have. And then a week later, which would be 1 week prior to the next board meeting, then we send out policies for second read. So then you have the ones that had two opportunities to provide comment on drafts before that second read is available 1 week prior to the next board meeting.
Sounds right.
Okay.
Good, very nice.
So,
So that's, I mean, we scoped the work this time, that's a big deal, so, you know.
I think that applying what you just read, based on summarizing what we brought to you, and applying it consistently to every policy that we have, goes a long way as compared to what has been done in the past. So it's gonna make for a much better policy manual. Okay, with that said, unless there's anything else or points?
I don't have any points on the manual, but I do have a couple of questions
Okay.
that I,
Sure,
Well, sorry, I thought it went back.
let us know, give us a thumbs up.
I didn't say it, you know, so. Hey, you're mine. Knows exactly where mine was going. Just rum. I did? I've just become a lifer of rum. Yeah. Because I always thought of rum as being gross Bacardi rum. Till one of my friends sent me some Diplomatico.
Cool.
I don't,
Good rum, tastes like, all right.
It's almost like, it gets up in like
It's
the whiskeys where you
smooth,
get like, I mean.
Okay.
Yeah, really, and that's why
I never knew, I always thought of rum as being like icky.
what we're doing. Like I said, usually on the.
Yeah, well, that's, it shows you my rum experience, right? Bacardi in a jug.
Bacardi is.
The scary part.
Oh, we started again?
Page gets long.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, can you put it on this bottom?
Mhm. There's a couple,
Does Chief Coyle need to repeat his summary?
Pardon me?
Does Chief Coyle need to repeat his summary?
Oh, for the recording? I don't know, maybe.
Oh, you guys didn't action it, so I don't think. Okay, we're good.
Now we're back on. Go far.
yeah.
Okay, we're back online, and I don't know if we caught what Chief Coyle's. He's good?
Yep. Those-
Okay. Starting with this first one here, 2401, if you want to give us just a synopsis of what this one is, and then comment on that.
It essentially is just, it's a collection of all the policies that reflected hiring, recruitment, membership development, compensation, things like, it's compensation policy, it's organizational administrative policy. And, a lot of it's statutorily required, and it just, it encompasses employment essentially of district employees, you know, drug and alcohol, infection control, travel, expense coverage, things like that. And as stated, we'll format it and get it to Lexipolese, but, that's essentially what that one covers.
If I, a couple of questions. One is, and this may be putting the cat in among the pigeons, but, I noticed that we prohibit discrimination based on race, sex, color, age, religious creed, marital status, or disability. We don't do anything about sexual orientation. And I don't know what the Arizona statutes are on that. Bill?
We will,
Arizona doesn't protect sexual identity, or orientation.
You tell the Californians here.
Yeah.
Arizona hasn't gotten that far yet.
I was gonna say, we're not that far.
All right. The other question I have is, we open this policy by talking about members and membership development, but I think every place else we talk about employees. And in fact, members are employees. Correct?
correct.
So I'm,
Members are employees, but not all employees are members, depending on how the word member is used. Sometimes members used as a member of a labor group or something, so you're right, we should pick a standardized language that, you know,
yeah,
maybe, and maintain that language throughout.
Maybe a holdover from volunteer days, because you are a member and not an employee.
Yeah.
I bet.
yeah. Thank you. That was the two things that popped right off the bat.
You know, that it doesn't mention genetics, political affiliation, or some other things. So back to the statute, there's certain statutory ones that aren't, it doesn't have the genetics one in here.
I do have a question. May I?
Yes, sir.
Jason, I noticed this particular policy you just mentioned dances around any number of personnel, employment issues. Nothing is said about sexual harassment or EEOC, non-discrimination, you know, the standard paragraph. Gather that was intentional, that those didn't get slid into this particular 2024 point or -01.
No, I don't believe it was. I think because of how the hierarchy of policies was before, it didn't start with laws, but I feel like, no matter what we discussed before, it's good with the chief, but that we start with those laws, like, and we build the box around everything first. We're gonna follow these laws, and then we scope it down to the, what's it called, board regulations or board rules, and then the statutory rules, and then down from there, and it doesn't do it that way. To me, that seems like a good flow, but I don't know why it's not in here.
Those policies I just mentioned are found elsewhere in the policy manual.
They are,
Testing policy is elsewhere.
yep, and then,
So that could go in saying that in combining redundant policies into one document, that we need to be careful not to put so many different individual policies, if they're called out elsewhere, into one document and perhaps make light of or.
tell you the truth, I didn't pay attention when this was done, and Kim Danger wasn't here when this was done. I don't know, I mean, it just, really, this just reads bad. I mean, just the language about how tremendous dedication and all that kind of, you put something in there once if you want to stroke us, and then, like, leave it aside, because it does that throughout here, and it makes it hard to read, it makes it hard to get the meat of it. I don't know, if the board and the chief are good with it, I heard what was said, we could make this where it is scoped more properly without,
Removing intent.
yeah, it's just not.
Well, I may have lost my way in the conversation, but I think it's critical that we do have a policy on sexual harassment.
You do already.
Okay.
It's just not in here.
And so, all right, so I want to confirm we have that, and it won't get lost.
No, it won't get lost. Yes, I didn't answer your whole question. Yes, we have it. No, it won't get lost. I think we should lead with the laws in that respect, especially the laws about that relative to employment, and then we go down into the other stuff. So everybody knows right from the beginning, these are the hard stops. We're gonna follow these. And, it doesn't,
Question. What about, previous felonies? Is that covered?
Not in here. I haven't looked at your policy manual for quite a while. Jason, is there something about, prior convictions?
Or hiring process documentation.
there is, I can't remember what it says, so there's statute about certain things, when it comes to things that would keep you away from schoolyard, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's DHS requirements, right? There's
Yeah.
criteria that has to be met. And I don't know, we've looked at people, it's usually the age of it, the type of it, what occurred, if it was, I forgot the word, not expunged, but the record stuff, when we do their background, to consideration, but it doesn't, someone got, I don't know if it's felony or not, but got popped for smoking pot when they're 18 and they're 28 right now and just spent 10 years as a decorated Marine Corps.
There's a body of law
Doesn't, yeah,
that's restrictions,
age,
how long you can take that stuff into account. It's not dealt with in this stuff in your binder. My suspicion is it's already dealt with elsewhere in the personnel policy manual. But EEOC has a descending sense of importance that they want to place on how long you can take into account someone's conviction of almost anything. Here's
Disparate workplace things with prior felonies too, because it's certain.
and I like, I mean, to me, this is like money. Hey, what, is this mentioned in here? What, and some of it, if there's like legal standing, we just put those in. But then, like, the, thing about, discriminating based on sexual orientation, it's not, so it doesn't meet the big box of being a state, of being a protected class recognized by the state. And then the board would have, if you want to include that on something that's something we want to go on record and say we don't discriminate against, then that would be up to the board, but we can at least come back with you with whatever ideas you have, but these ones are statute, these ones are referenced elsewhere, blah, 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 and then you guys know what's not.
And a lot of these are covered in, a lot of our human resource guidelines and federal policies and things like that.
Well, the one thing that just is jumping out at me now is there's a lot of references to SAPs. And that's great, but the board policies should cover the things that apply to the board. And we aren't part of the SAP process. And so I like the idea of the referral to the SAP. I think we need for board members to have the policies that cover board members for board members.
Well, and this 24-01 is a condensed version, as you know, of many policies, but does the board need a hiring and recruitment selection policy?
not as a matter of law.
And
Let me say it a different way. The district needs a policy.
yes,
And the board, there is almost always a point where the board approves all of your employment policies as a group.
and like we've got a drug and alcohol-free workplace policy, so does the board need one? Is kind of my question. Like, I don't know why, they're speaking to redundancy,
One for a drug-free, alcohol-free board
No, this has not,
policy.
this is SFD is committing to a drug and alcohol-free workplace, but we have policies for that. So why do we have a board policy for that?
I was wondering myself, what kind of policy book were we talking about here? Because it sounds like, we just want one that applies to the board and what the board needs to, cover legally and with its duties, but the rest of the policies, like HR policies and SOP policies, those would be, y'all's to create and us to, approve.
And I don't know why there's a board policy that references infection control.
That's, Chief, that's almost non-existent elsewhere. Very few districts have a board policy on either of those topics. It's
Yeah.
all handled in the personnel policy manual.
So we can,
So just let me play the devil's advocate for just,
I was gonna, I think,
Yeah.
go ahead.
we, I think all know of instances in the greater Verde Valley community where people who are board members or in senior positions of leadership have abused all of the above, drugs, sexual harassment, et cetera. Not that I particularly want us to have a policy, but I would hate to find us in a situation where we don't have a policy that applies to the board
The whole back.
and we needed it.
understood. So we'll format that and include some of these changes.
Bill, how does that normally work? If it's in our SAPs, does it need to reside in a different area? I think back to the earlier question, if it's gonna apply to the board members as well?
The answer to that's a little more complex than the question.
That's okay.
Generally speaking, what happens is the board has, in years gone by, they've adopted a policy manual. That policy manual is full of stuff that is operational and HR oriented. Within that, then, there's a delegation of the fire chief of all SAPs, SOPs, et cetera, and the chief is creating those to make those policies do their job. The board almost never sees those SAPs or SOPs and doesn't care about them. They have a right to look at them and put them back on the table if they want, but almost never do. And so, beyond approving the district's policy manual, the board does not get involved in it. The board will take those things that you're calling board policy, that actually relate to how you conduct yourselves. As an example, the financial policies that are referenced in here that Gabe spends so much time putting together. Those are, in the early days, were all covered under your bylaws. And your bylaws had a section of procedure and a section for policies, but they were board policies. We don't support smoking, and we don't want anybody on the board to do so. Clearly a statement of policy, totally unenforceable. You can't remove somebody from the board for that because you're elected officials, but it's a statement of philosophy, if you will, about it. Those all used to be found in bylaws, and those bylaws are broken into the sections you've seen, you've commented on. The one is history, and one is procedure, and one is policy. That was kind of common. None of the policies sitting in here, in the old days, ever resided in board policies. Those board policies never escaped the bylaws. And those bylaws grew over time until districts started actually issuing board policies. It's rare, frankly, around the state for very many boards to have board policies that are outside of something like your bylaws. You guys call them a handbook, and when Tricia did this, she kind of decided to move away from the bylaw world into a board handbook world. But all of the stuff that I see in your handbook smells very much like the stuff we used to see in bylaws. You are an exception. You are one of the rare boards that actually adopts a plethora of board policies. Nobody has a board policy on drug testing. They have an HR policy on drug testing. I've seen some boards try to enforce certain of those obligations on the board, unsuccessfully for the most part, but those tend to be found in the bylaws. And those, that's not that they can't be board policies, but they're integrated into what you're calling your handbook, not part of the overall policy structure. Most of these policies you won't see in any other district's arrangement. And I don't know how that came to be. This happened during the Tricia era, and I wasn't connected to it, so I can't speak to it with any kind of authority. But I don't know if that answers your question. You guys are, you're more detailed than most. Let me say it that way.
Well, from my perspective, it doesn't answer my question. I mean, they make a very good point, but I guess, my question is very simply, are we governed by the SAPs?
The district is, you are not.
So,
You're responsible for the SAPs, but you have delegated that authority to the chief.
right, so if then the drug policy, the sexual harassment policy, et cetera, are all SAPs, not board policies, then in the event that I decide to become wild and crazy and show up for meetings drunk all the time, no one can do anything about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, yes, core warrant to action to remove you from the board, turn you over to the AG's office, call a cop because you're disrupting the meeting, recall election. There are things that can be done, but not as a matter of, the policy encourages board conduct. It doesn't legally control board conduct. It controls employment conduct, the chief's conduct, rank and file's conduct, not yours. It is, for lack of a better description, a recommendation.
That's sort of wrong.
Yeah.
It's wrong.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, that a volunteer elected position,
Elected,
does the organization have the ability to govern conduct? And it's self-governed.
Yeah, we have to
It is, the board,
tell to,
the board self-governs.
Yeah, so.
The statute has some obligations put on you. As an example, you could sexually harass a member of rank and file, flat out against the law. You can't do it. And there's remedies for that, civil and criminal. And so you could adopt a policy that says the board will not sexually harass people. Districts don't do that. Districts have a policy against sexual harassment inside their HR policy manual. There are some districts that in that policy manual will say this applies not only to members, but to the governing board.
that's what I was gonna ask, if you could do that.
And that's not unheard of.
That makes more sense.
That makes more sense.
It covers,
Choose which one of those happen. The problem with that is, the reason I don't like that, I prefer in the bylaws, is because when you say this applies to rank and file and the board, you gotta go look at the remedy section now that talks about discipline. Well, you can't be disciplined, and so now we have to have a section that says, what do we do about that? We decided to make sexual harassment applicable to you by policy, not just the statute. Then when you violate it, we have to have a whole nother section that says, what do we do about that? You can't be fired, you can't be demoted, none of that. And so now you gotta have a whole body of stuff.
well, why can't,
Because you stuffed your name into a definition of members and board.
why can't we be fired? I mean, I know we don't get a salary, but why can't we be dismissed and replaced with another board member?
Oh, a quo warranto action, you have to sue to do that.
Oh, my goodness.
You're an elected official. And nobody can remove you unless you follow the rules. Quo warranto action, punish each other. We sued a board member one time for violating the open meeting law. Got an injunctive order. You had to go to court to do that. We sued a board member to remove them because they tried to vote in another precinct for themselves twice. You know, those kind of things are your legal remedies, but your policy about that is nothing more than a recognition of the statute that already deals with it.
So if I understand correctly, we should have a very small group of board policies.
Yep. Used to be 4. Budget and finance based.
Governing board vacancy, compensation administration, conflict of interest, and contract review.
Yeah, that's a fair statement. You guys really are responsible for money. And, well, geez, but, you know, aren't we responsible for HR? Yeah, in a broad sense, but you're not telling firefighter A to do anything. He's telling firefighter A to do something. That's why he's the only person that you have under contract. And you don't have me under contract as a firefighter, you know, you just don't do that. You could, that'd be crazy, but you could. Your responsibilities are fiduciary. And you can always argue that a valid, appropriate, non-harassment policy speaks to your fiduciary duty in some way because it keeps you being sued and all that kind of stuff. But it's a little bit broad. That's why you adopt policy manuals in general, and you adopt a bylaw that talks to you or about you, and in your case, handbooks and board policies, if you will. But we don't have another client that has a board policy about discrimination, not where it's found.
It is mentioned 8 times, though, sexual harassment in the policy handbook, just so you know.
in our policy handbook.
apply to SFD and their agents, just like federal law, so that would be.
Yeah, that's the federal law thing.
Walks through the door that's gonna hang blinds if he sexually harasses someone, that's just as illegal as if he worked here, is my understanding.
It is, and it's illegal for you to sexually harass
That's
someone.
right, I'm so
But
funny.
if you look at your harassment policy, it talks about punishment. If he sexually harasses somebody, there is punishment in your policy. Try to apply that policy to you guys. It's not gonna happen.
Oh, yeah, man, we're running all.
That just doesn't sound right. It really doesn't.
You're an elected official. You're immune to a lot of things that,
But we should not be immune to many things.
that's a political thing.
We didn't do that.
Or undo it, apparently.
Watch this.
But we have a much smaller list of board policies.
Yeah, that could go in here. They can't be enforced, right?
Frankly speaking, 24-3, which is governing board policy, development of policies, 24-4, contract review, 24-5, fund balance, arguably 24-6, grants and how to administer or accept grants, and then 24-7, principles of sound fiscal management are the big dogs.
And then the vacancy policy,
Yeah, and then,
which is super simple and spelled out and already, so it'd just be more referencing the statute.
There's an excellent example of, I've written dozens of vacancy policies, but they've all been inside the bylaws or the handbook that you guys have. That's where we see them.
And then we had a conflict of interest one. Should we have a conflict of interest one on the board?
You would typically have that in the handbook or in the bylaws, board bylaws, but you have one that applies to employees as well,
And we have
which
to-
is semi-rare, but certainly not unheard of.
Okay, so the question that comes about then is where do we go from here?
Well, we
Well, if,
find out.
if the scope that was defined in this conversation is agreeable to the board, then we have a narrower box to start with to work on board policies about.
You do. You know, I do also appreciate though that, I haven't gotten a chance to read all these, but are the duties of the, board chair and of the clerk, those are nice to have in there, helpful to
The
have.
duties and process stuff, like when we do our, set the calendar and all that kind of stuff. I think there's certain, like those process pieces are a good idea to have somewhere.
Abilities perhaps.
Whether you see them in policy or bylaws or handbooks, you're almost always, you'll find them there.
Yeah.
It's very common.
So if we start with the ones that Chief Mazzulis read out, plus the other two that were referenced, and then we can look at, you can look at, the process pieces, or position performance, either one of those two is like, I don't know if there's a position description for the board clerk, but there's something similar to that, and for the board chair, roles and responsibilities. And then the process pieces about all that as a board handbook, or a board component of the employee, I can't say employee because it's not your own employees, but of the board handbook, and then we would,
Board member handbook.
board member handbook, yeah.
and most boards have an annual canned conflict of interest document you sign. And then,
But it goes without saying that when we look and review our existing manual, it has just been added and added and added to over the years. Kind of gotten away from truly what it's meant to do. And if we bring it back into the framework of those as described by the big 4 or 5, we can bring it back to where it should be. And I think we've come to the realization that's about where we need to be.
Sure.
So with that being said, Chief, if we can utilize these 5 that we have here, actually, we're not even looking at the first 2, 2401 and 2402, but the rest of them, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, along with the 1 or 2 that are not in here, based on the list that Doyle read. Get those out to us. We could do our comments to these back to Kimberly or back to staff. by next Tuesday.
So to be clear, the intent is that the policies outlined provide feedback. Staff will provide a conflict of interest and board vacancy policy, and then we will make the identified edits to the handbook.
The other thing that may be in there too is, and I don't know if it's in here, is the, electronic devices. There was a policy on electronic device use.
What?
Is that in here? In three?
Rule 3 or?
Yeah. And
Okay.
out of one, we need to take and include, because I think it does apply to the board, the travel and expenses.
Okay, is that in one of these?
It's in number 1.
Okay. Okay, then hopefully we got that spelled out in that 3 through 7 excerpts out of 1. We'll send back to Kim back to you, back to staff for inclusion into the other ones, along with conflict of interest. And what was the other? Conflict of interest and
Board vacancy.
board vacancies.
Referencing Rule 11 and Rule 19.
Do we need grants in there? Was grants a part of
Pardon
it, Chair? The 6, grants, do we need that in the, I don't think we do.
So I think you do, because
Yeah.
previously we had grants that we gave away, we had to pay money back because of the mishandling of grants. So it created a fiscal impact, so. Yeah,
You leave it at that.
yeah.
So
Okay.
we understand that it's our job now, it's back on the board's hands, to review these, get them back to staff by next Tuesday. And do we have a date for next Tuesday? What, is
Here.
3.
that the 22nd?
Dang it.
23 is next
Uh-huh.
Tuesday.
Okay, so by the 23rd, we'll get these back to staff.
On rules 19, 11 and 19.
No, that's the reference to, fill a board vacancy and a conflict of interest.
Okay.
So and those are two very canned, I'm sure there are some examples readily available.
Let's have more time after next month, that's a lot.
Now, at that point, once they come back to us, we'll give them that second reading. And then we'll tackle these first ones that we have, so that by next board meeting, these may be approved. We'll see what happens. And then the continual of going through any other ones that may need to be added, or that may be the totality of all of them for that manual. That I don't know yet. Comments?
This is a good plan.
Yeah.
I'm just, would like clarification. Do we give these all to Kim or to Chief Coyle or to?
Kim will be the conduit, and then we'll work together.
Work with Kim on that and just give them to Kim, or do you want them, Chief, for you to give?
Kim will be the conduit, and then we'll work together, staff, to get everything.
Okay, then that consensus is, we're all in agreement, that's the direction we'll go. Consensus is good enough for this? Okay.
I'm doing this, giving this through email to Kim, right?
Yes.
Do we have those on our email? Did they get shipped out to the email? Okay, because I had not seen them.
Yeah, I looked, I didn't see them. I didn't see them.
Not yet.
No.
We don't have them.
Okay. Any other questions, any other comments? And for today's workshop on the policy manual is now closed. Okay. With that being said, moving on to the agenda. Our regular business meeting. I'll tell you, before we get on to that, let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break for personal reasons. Copy. Taking a 5-minute break. Policy on that. Yeah.
That was actually really useful. That was really useful.
Well, recording? we're good to go. Okay, as we move forward in our agenda for tonight, our regular business meeting, Chief, do we have anybody speaking from, the public?
We do not.
Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda, and that entails discussion of possible action approval of this December 19, 2023 regular meeting minutes. We have two resolutions and an update, authorized signers for Yavapai County funds. Basically, these are for removal of one board member and the insertion of another board member on this consent agenda, of which we all need signatures. Also on the consent agenda, I move to approve the consent agenda as stated. Do I have a second?
Second.
Is there any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The consent agenda has been approved. Please don't leave from the meeting this evening until you've signed those documents, and I've got them here. Okay, next up on the agenda is the financial report and updates, presented by Director of Finance, Gabe Bolger.
All right, well, good afternoon, or I guess good evening almost, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Hope everybody had a great holiday and Happy New Year. You do have the December financials in the packet. Starting off, tax revenue for the month, we brought in $2,069,000. It was about $300,000 over what we had projected for the month of December. And you'll see when we get to year to date, we're actually trending ahead for the first 6 months, year to date as well on tax collection. So happy to report that positive news. On the non-levy revenue, we brought in $553,000, which was $285,000 over budget. Both wildland and ambulance revenue helped attribute to that. We also got our semi-annual payment on our marijuana tax revenue, which was $109,000. So that also helped kind of create that positive variance on the revenue side for the month of December. On the expenses, our total expenses were $2,298,000. We were under budget by $69,000, and looking at the graphs there, you'll see personnel at $2,082,000 was a predominant driver of that variance. Buildings and land came right in budget at $25,000. Vehicles and equipment was under budget by $19,000. We did have one overage for the month under communication and IT, and that was over budget by $24,000. Couple things driving that. One of the fancy new iPads that Director Cooperman has.
Yeah.
We purchased a couple of those last month, and so that drove that variance, as well as some portable radios. And so that's what's kind of driving the overage under communication IT for the month. Moving on, year to date, our total revenues at $14,984,000. We are over budget through the first 6 months of the year by $621,000 in revenue. However, $450,000 of that is driven by property tax collection. So while we're over on taxes, doesn't mean we're going to end the year that much over. Just we're collecting faster than we've collected historically. And again, to remind the board, we look at a month-over-month collection, looking at a 3-year average, looking back 3 years. So that's what we use to determine what our anticipated collection is in each given month. Non-levy revenue as well is over year to date by $170,000. Again, ambulance revenue is helping drive that. We're over budget by $140,000, as well as our interest income. Through the first 6 months, we brought in $260,000 in interest income for the year, which is over budget by $210,000. We're pretty conservative on our estimates, not knowing what interest rates we're going to do into the new year. So far, things are looking like we'll be staying around these rates for another couple of months. So, but again, government and the feds are unpredictable. They start lowering rates, we'll see that return drop relatively quickly after that. On the expense side, we're at $10,812,000 total expenditures, which is under budget by $580,000. Again, personnel being the predominant driver of that. And then again, overage under communication and IT, some of the expenditures that we talked about that occurred, this month, as well as earlier in the year, we purchased new Panasonic Tough Books. There was some fees to get speed connected, parts and equipment removed off our tower. That was kind of unanticipated expenditures within the budget. As far as expenses, year to date, we've expended 49% with 51% remaining. And again, that's reflective of that savings I just mentioned. If not, we'd be at 50% or over 50% if we were over budget. As far as where our money, as far as expenses have gone, personnel is the highest expenditure. It accounts for 84% of our total expenses, followed by operational expenses at 7%. Communication at 5%, and managerial at 4%. Year over year, we ended the month with $19.6 million total cash on hand, compared to $17.1 million last year this same time. It's about an increase of about $2.5 million from a cash perspective. Other assets increased from 24.7 to 25.5, and our total liabilities actually increased slightly from 32.8 to 32.9. And the driver of that is really the recording of our accrued payroll for purposes of the audit. And so actually, after Lydia presents the audit tonight, we'll have some more adjustments to make to some of those numbers on pension and some other things that will change these numbers when you see the next month's report. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions the board has.
No.
Excuse me, Gabe. Recently, PSPRS, we received our report evaluation. Hard to figure out at times which one it is. Is it the overall program or that specific to Sedona Fire District? I'm kind of hitting you cold with this because Sarah that presented the report, but for the benefit of the rest of the board and members of our community, where are we? How are we looking as a district in PSPRS and the program as a whole?
Yeah, so good question, Mr. Chair, members of the board. What Director Soto's talked about is, as part of our pension, public safety pension, we are part of a larger pool, and we are also in our own pool. And that depends on which tier our employees are in, and those are all based on hire dates. And that has all changed due to legislative action over the years. So our Tier 1 and our Tier 2 employees, which is the traditional defined benefit program, is what we have. It's our largest liability. Based on the most recent actuarial, that unfunded liability has grown to $26 million, where we're paying about, we're going to be paying almost about 46% per dollar of wage into the pension is Sedona Fire District's cost per employee in that pool. On the other hand, there's the kind of the shared pension, which is our Tier 3 plan. Those are for our newer members. That plan is actually overfunded to the tune of, it's got about an $8.1 million surplus or asset situation. And so that one is very well funded. However, we have a legacy cost for our Tier 1 and Tier 2 that we pay on our Tier 3 employees. So we still have a fairly similar contribution rate for them as well, because they're helping kind of pay down that $26 million that we have. Because if we didn't, obviously, and as those older employees retire out of the system, new people aren't going into it, and therefore we would sit with a liability that would never be addressed. It's overall, I'd say we're about middle of the road when you look at where people are within the pension system. Fortunately, with where our budget is at, it's still a affordable and a sustainable amount for Sedona Fire. We have looked at and continue to look at, one of the things is, bolstering our cash position in an attempt in the future to possibly pay down that liability above and beyond our annual required contribution. But again, we continue to find ourselves in a lot of volatility within the PSPRS system, where we look at other systems, both for our clients that are in Colorado and our our clients here that, and even Sedona participates in the ASRS system, they actually saw a decrease in contribution rate, for next year. Not a lot, not a big amount, but we're still seeing stability in other pension plans that we're not seeing in PSPRS. And until they work through things, our position with our clients is still, you know, sit on the cash, have the money available to help pay that not only required contribution if you find yourself in a financial position to where you need it, but also be ready when we do start seeing some stability, be able to start paying that down and not pay it down and then turn around in a year, have that liability there again. And now you don't have the cash and the liability didn't change.
That kind of brought us to the question is, which I usually bring up once every couple of years, is with the amount of cash on hand, the ability to pay down some of that unfunded liability. But with that said, the response generally is, let's keep our money where it's safe and where it can accrue interest, as opposed to putting it into this unfunded liability where rates are changing all the time. And so that is the response that I get that keeps us away from doing that, which is probably the absolute smartest thing to do. So I just say, okay, you know, but it's good to know that. I think the other thing that I wanted to mention too is it's good to know that 6-7 years ago, it was so volatile, the PSPRS, with the rates that were being charged, that the new regime that went in there to kind of slow that process down has done just that. And although there is rate fluctuations, they're much smaller.
Correct. That's a good point, Mr. Chair. I mean, before we were seeing 5, 6, 7% year-over-year increases in contribution rates. Now this past year, it's about 1.5%, you know, across when we look at all three plans, so to speak, that our members are a part of. So that is a lot better. So we're getting there, but still not, I don't think we're quite there yet.
Super. Anything else? Okay, and that was the totality of your finance report? Yes. Okay. With that said, I'll move to approve the December, the December, nope, that's the wrong one. Let me get to the right one. I'll go ahead and move to approve the December 2023 finance report as presented. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The December 2023 finance report is approved. Thank you. Next on the agenda is the discussion, possible action, and approval of the 2022 annual comprehensive financial report.
All right, Mr. Chair, members of the board, actually, point of clarification, that should be the 2023 annual comprehensive financial report.
2023, correct. Thank you.
I apologize for that. But yes, Mr. Chair, members of the board, we do have Lydia Hunter with Beach Fleshman. They are our auditors on Zoom to present the findings on the audit. I do know the board, you know, just received this information with kind of a very short period of time, and I know you all want to read through that report page by page. But so what I was going to say, though, is if the board isn't comfortable accepting the report tonight, that's okay. We can bring it back next month for adoption. But ultimately, we do want Lydia to present tonight, maybe answer any questions you guys have this evening. And if you're not comfortable accepting the report, we can do that again next month and still be within our statutory timelines.
Okay, well, let's go ahead with the presentation then.
All right, great. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Can you hear me okay?
Hang on, we're adjusting that right now. Give us a 1, 2, 3 count.
1, 2, 3.
Great.
Very, very good. Thank you.
Good. Okay, great. And I do have a presentation. Can I share my screen, or do you have it, Kimberly?
We're going to get you set up to share a screen.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead and try to share now.
Okay. It still says it's disabled.
Got this, man.
No pressure.
Need some duct tape? Pick.
Ooh, I see it. Check box under allow all participants.
It working?
Yes. Perfect. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, well, again, Mr. Chair, members of the board, I appreciate the opportunity to present our audit results to you today. So as mentioned, this is for your fiscal year that ended June 30, 23. So some highlights for the audit. We are prepared to issue an unmodified opinion on the financial statement. So that is a clean opinion. That is the best opinion that we can issue for the district. Something significant this year is that we did what's called a single audit. So anytime an organization receives more than $750,000 of federal funding within 1 year, you are suddenly required to have a single audit, which is an additional audit which builds on the regular audit, and it's a very compliance-based audit. So this year, because the district received about 1.1 million in ARPA funds from the state, you were kicked into that requirement to have a single audit. So this is the first single audit we've done for Sedona. I'm not sure if there were any in other prior years, but I do want to, I'm happy to say that we're also prepared to issue an unmodified opinion on the major program. So that, again, is a clean opinion on your single audit. And also, we actually had no findings at all on the single audit. We look at, for that, the attributes of that program, and it was a very payroll intensive program. So we did a lot of testing on your payroll related to that. So good job in getting through your first single audit. So I just wanted to point that out. Okay, and then I'm going to go through the last 4 bullet points are just the other items I'm going to discuss on some other slides. So we'll jump to the required communication. So also you should receive with the draft the letter that's on our letterhead that just has some required communication. So I'm required to tell you certain things related to the audit. So the letter has more detail. I'll just briefly touch on some of this right now. So the first being the accounting policies. So management is responsible for determining the accounting policies to use, and we look at them and make sure they're appropriate for the district. There were no new significant accounting policies that affected the district this year, and we believe all the policies are appropriate and everything is recorded in the proper period. We talk about estimates because estimates, if the estimates we use were to change in the future, it could have a change in the numbers that we report. So your most significant estimates are the allowance for your ambulance receivables. So at June 30, you had a balance in your receivables, and how much of that do we actually expect to collect? Your depreciable lives of your capital assets. So we assign useful lives to those assets, and that obviously could end up being different than the lives assigned. And then obviously your most significant estimate, which you guys were just talking about in the previous section, which is your pension liability, is based on a lot of actuarial assumptions, which are all based on estimates. We believe the disclosures in your financial report are neutral, consistent, and clear. We don't believe there's any sensitive disclosures that I need to point out to you today. We had no significant disagreements with management. That's my required language. I'm pleased to report we had no disagreements at all working with management or anyone at the district. We do look at state statutes as part of the audit, so we are required to look at compliance with certain state statutes. So the one listed there, that's been around for a few years now. We do express our opinion that we believe you're in compliance with that. Because you had a single audit this year, that actually is in the single audit report. So that's where you'll find that compliance opinion. And then adjustments. So we had no unrecorded adjustments, so no adjustments that weren't corrected as part of the audit. And I'll make this a little bit bigger. I don't really want to go into a lot of detail on this, but this just shows you the top number is the audit, the numbers when we started the audit, and shows you how it got to the final audited balances. So what you'll see here is there's,
Lydia?
Yes.
Lydia? We're having technical difficulties. If you could hold on 1 second.
Sure.
This is in a different, she emailed it to us earlier today, and it's in a different email.
Kim didn't touch anything.
But well, that's it, that's why I went to this, because I didn't want to do that to my neck. Let's look on that one too.
Gonna make a hotspot on my phone?
It was,
It was up there?
yeah.
You should have kicked me or something.
We're having, so,
It's just bird on the wire.
All right, you're back on.
Okay, we're good to go again?
Yes.
You just gotta share.
Oh, that's to share again?
Oh, okay, never mind.
No, you're good.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so again, this is just showing the pre-audit balances and the adjustments to get there. So there were some provided by client, that's just timing of when we received the trial balance and the adjustment. So the client was just adjusting depreciation expense. That's the large number. Your depreciation is about $1 million for the year. And adjusting your ambulance receivables. We had no adjustments except for the 2 areas that we adjust for you as a non-attest service. So we adjust your leases. In accordance with the accounting standards. It's very complicated what they've done with the leases now, so we adjust that for you. And then we also adjust the pension liability to the actuarial reports. So those are standard recurring entries. We had no other entries other than those to your books. So I'm just gonna highlight a couple of things on the statement of net position. I'm gonna show you this as opposed to the actual draft itself, because the draft itself is just a 1-year snapshot. Okay, so your current assets, you'll see those trended up. So you had about oh, yeah.
Lydia, sorry, we lost you on the screen again. Can
Oh,
you just reference
sorry.
the page in the handout that you're looking at? Because they all have that in their packet.
Oh,
So you can
sure.
put that up.
Sure, of course. So if you have the handout, it's gonna be in the presentation where it says financial highlights statement of net position. I'll give you guys a second to find that.
So it's page 5 if you guys are pulling up the PDF.
All right, is everyone looking at the same thing?
getting there.
We're getting.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect. One more page.
It's not you, Lydia, it's us.
No,
There.
it's okay.
Yeah.
We should have Wi-Fi that
It's a lot. Last minute week.
Okay,
Of course, it's not loading.
no,
Here,
Wow.
you guys
of course
work
I
on.
didn't. Let me see if I have
But
it.
the thing doesn't have.
All right, Lydia, we're good.
Okay, perfect.
Well,
Okay.
we recorded.
So the statement of net position, that's your balance sheet. In other words, that's all your assets and all your liabilities. So you'll see that your current assets went up from 22 to 23. So you have about $1 million more in cash at the end of the year, but you also have about $1 million of receivables related to that ARPA grant. So remember, what kicked you into the single audit was that ARPA money. So that was in receivables at year end, and you collected the money, I believe, in August. You will see your non-current liabilities went down. That's just your standard debt payment. If you look, you'll see there's a line that says net pension OPEB liability. So again, this is an actuarially determined liability number. This is separate reports from the reports you guys were discussing that set your contribution rates each year. But the actuary set what is basically the pension liability. And the idea is they set this number, and the idea is it should be able to be repaid over the next 25 to 30 years based on your contributions. You will see that it was 27 million in 21, went down to 24 million, and back to 27 million in 23. So you really don't have any control over that. There's a lot of assumptions that go into that, including how the market is doing. And there is a whole year delay with when these numbers relate to and when I report them. So a lot of this up and down in the pension liability is driven by what the market has been doing. So no concern there. I just want to point out it unfortunately did go back up. And then your unrestricted line under the net position. So the net position is your equity. So you have positive equity as a whole, but your unrestricted net equity is negative. And what we want to see is that trending towards positive, and it continues to trend in the right direction. So we're really happy to see that, especially with the increase in the pension liability, that you still managed to increase your unrestricted net position. Is great. If you turn to the next page, which is the statement of activities. So this is your income statement. So just highlight a few things here. You'll see your trend in property tax revenue has continued to increase. You had a assessed valuation. Your valuation went up about 4.7%, and your rate increased 4.2% last year. So that combined is driving the increase in your property tax revenue. And then you will see that line grant. So you don't typically get these large grants. So we did isolate that large ARPA grant for you so you can see that so it doesn't skew the years in the future. And then the other revenue, the increase there is actually investment income. So the 500,000 that increase from the prior year is driven by investment income. And then on your expenses, you'll see your operating expenses did increase. And that's really primarily driven by increases in salaries and related costs. Your pension expense that we isolate here, that is an actuarially determined number. So for your reference, you contributed actual cash contributions to the plan was about 3.7 million in 23 and about 3.2 million in 22. So a little bit different than this actuarially determined number, but your cash flows are about 3.7 million. All right, any questions on those? Okay, I'll keep going through. I've got one more slide with numbers, and that's just the cash flow summary. So that's on the next slide. So this is just because the other ones are not on a cash basis, just so you can see the cash position of the district. And really what you want to see here is positive cash flows on the line that says operating activities. We expect capital outlay to be negative. We expect you to continue to invest in capital assets, and we expect debt payments to be negative as you pay down your debt. But what we really want to see is positive cash flows from operations, which the district has had all of the last 3 years. All right, so now just to talk about internal controls. So again, I'm really pleased to report that we did not have any findings, especially related to the single audit. So I just had this slide in here today to talk about segregation of duties and your role as board members and how important that is in oversight. Obviously, the district does not have as much segregation of duties as we would like, just purely from the size of the district. So your role as in the board and your fiduciary role is really important. And so we thank you for your oversight role and just remind you how important your role is in the control structure. And then finally, this slide just talks a little bit, the last slide says annual comprehensive financial report. Gives you the layout of what the what that large 100-page document that you have to look at relates to. So there's basically 3 sections: an introductory section, a financial section, and a statistical section. So the only thing that you're required to have by state statute is that financial section. And that is what we're expressing an opinion on, is what's in that financial section. Doing the entire ACFR annual comprehensive financial report goes above and beyond and increases transparency in your district's financial statements. And it adds the introductory section and the statistical section. So we do not express an opinion on that, but we're required to read all of that information and make sure that nothing in those sections is inconsistent with the financial section, which we express our opinion on. So I just want to point that out. We're not waiting on the GFOA certification this year, so we have the complete packet that is ready to be approved. So again, you have the annual comprehensive financial report to approve, but you also have the single audit, which is a separate report, which again, just basically says you received this ARPA money, and there's a lot of standard language in our reports there. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone at the district and open it up to any questions you might have on the financials.
Any questions?
I had one. Could you please explain a little bit more the unrestricted net position versus the restricted? What is the unrestricted net position about? What is it contained in it?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I don't want to get too bogged down with accounting terms, but basically the net position is like your equity. So, but basically, so your equity is basically here. You have your assets, the things you own, and then you have the liabilities, the things you owe people. So the difference is basically your equity, your net position. But of your net position, some of that has been accounted for and is tied up in capital assets. So it's really like your really liquid equity that you have is your unrestricted, net position. And typically, a normal for-profit business would not survive with a negative unrestricted equity. But you guys can, because it's all driven by the pension liability. The reason you have that negative is because you have such a large pension liability, which is just, not, I don't want to say a fake number, but it's kind of an arbitrary number. It's not like you have to write a check for $27 million tomorrow. And that's why you have a negative net position, but it will go away over time as you continue to make payments on that net pension liability. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, yes.
If there's any other questions, it is good to hear that there were no opinions or errors or shortcomings of our audit. So good news, all good news.
And Mr. Chair, Lydia brushed over it, and I neglected to do a more formal announcement to the board, but we did receive our award for the 22 ACFR from GFOA. So if you remember in years past, we waited even longer for that, but we've actually received it in time. And so happy to report we did receive the award again for the 2022 ACFR.
Okay. So for this one, for 23,
We'll submit to GFOA once you guys accept it, and then we'll wait 6 to 9 months plus before we get a decision out of GFOA.
so with that said, based on the presentation you just had and the positive grade that we received, I'll ask the board if you're interested in tabling this until we have the actual report and can review it, or move forward with the motion to approve as presented.
Yeah, I'm fine with it.
I'm fine with
Good with
moving
it?
forward.
Okay. Then with that said, I'll go ahead and move to approve the 2023 Annual Comprehensive Financial Report as presented. Do I have a second?
Second.
Further discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. The motion carries and the report is approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia.
Thank you all. I appreciate it.
You have to do them both?
What?
You have to do the single audit and the other audit separate? Okay.
I see the risk. See, openness.
Okay. I'll get that when I get back into this. Okay, next item on the agenda is staff items, essentially the chief's report. Chief Azulis.
Yes, we are loading it.
Okay.
Why there was so much talk about the internet a few months ago. This is a setup. We would have done this before that.
I don't know what it is, but it changes.
It grew and then it stopped growing at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, the projector worm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very strange.
Yeah. You know what that is? Bug that exploded on the lines.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Really?
Yep.
It did it all slow though.
Hmm?
We were here when it happened. It was,
I think we were in here when it happened,
Oh, yeah.
because we watched it do its thing. Yeah, it took it like probably 15 minutes to cover that whole.
Okay, that's why, 'cause that makes sense.
I have lamps at the end.
Yes.
All right. Heidi took time off today, so I'll attempt to give a report. I think we covered the audit pretty in depth, you know, her assistance with that. Got through the holidays and payroll updates. I don't have any at this time. So next slide, please.
I'm not gonna talk about fires because it's winter time until April, unless y'all want me to. But, and so, two things that I want to hit on right now is and they're both HR related. So tomorrow, everybody in SFD, you guys get to hear it here first, will get, an email, get notified about the 23 job descriptions that have been updated, that are in draft form. And so each one of those is gonna go out to the incumbent, their supervisor, their, couple peers, their subordinates, and then a couple of at-large employees. So people that are receivers of the product, because they're all the non-operational job descriptions. And then between now and I think we said May 15th or March 15th, then all those are gonna be, updated feedback, and we will have new JDs that are, reflective of the positions based on work logs and based on an effort to align all the different roles and responsibilities. So, it's, similar to our policy manual. When you change job descriptions one at a time, and you don't look at things holistically to see how things fit together, and to see if roles and responsibilities are being properly, delegated and kind of siloed when siloing is appropriate, then you get, an abomination, maybe is a good word. And so we're trying to unabominate. Yeah. So, and then the other thing is that we have, finished the professional services agreement and is out to RGS for a total compensation study that we're supposed to do every 3 years, and this will be the 3rd year. And so that, combined with the job descriptions, makes me think that by April, we'll be in a good position to make informed decisions about a lot of different things related to the positions, and see where people sit relative to the median of the compensation for that particular job. And then third thing that's starting right now that will take a year to do is now the performance management part. So getting a performance management program that aligns with our intent-based leadership philosophies is a little bit harder than it would sound. It's a lot easier just to have, hey, sit down with your boss and have him tell you how awesome you are, what you did wrong, and then pretend that that's going to make you better going forward. But it was interesting. So I read this very large meta-analysis, so a study of a bunch of different studies that said that in the public sector, that those type of performance reviews don't improve performance. And not really a surprise, right? If you see somebody once a year and they sit down and tell you stuff, probably not going to drive performance very well either. It's either intrinsic or it's not. So we're looking at ways to do one that aligns with that intent-based thing. There'll be more to come on that, but it's taken a while because we do realize that in the past, what we've done is we've changed the form and they were like, go forth and do great things, and not train people, not made sure that it satisfied the intent. Surprise, it doesn't necessarily reach the phase of adoption, not to mention the phase where it actually adds value. So we're cautious of that. Those are the main things that we're working on. And the reason I figure I'd stick with those is those are what are in my what's the thing called? My strategic plan, or my strategic plan. Quarterly stuff. So there you go. Happy to answer any questions.
Any update on telecommunications and things that we should hear about IT?
Josh is still above water.
Josh is still here. You know, one thing.
I'm quitting after this meeting.
Yeah. One thing, you know what though, there's something that, Josh may already know this because I told Bob, so tomorrow when this comes out, there'll be an org chart and everything, and I want to make Josh aware, but, or make Bob aware, but, so Josh's position right now, correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, but you have basically network responsibilities, and then you have application and user support responsibilities.
Among many other little.
Right, yeah, those are probably the big buckets.
Yes.
And so the job descriptions will come out. We can't just clone Josh, that would be easier, but we'll have 2 different JDs that split that work, and it will be up to Josh and Bob to figure out how much splitting and how much overlapping. Because when it comes to applications, the other thing we have is a 25-year engineer that is intrinsic to our telestaff and other programs that, he's an engineer. And he's got 25 years. He could decide he's going to go do something else, and then we would look at Josh to add one more thing to his plate.
Well, and
So we're working to fix that.
to reinforce Chief Quayle's statement, we have a fire engineer that is nearing retirement. That is the only person in this organization that can manipulate the software that we use to pay our employees.
So our gap now, so that means we need to get Josh help, and we need to get it where we're not expecting people to be the jack of all trades, master of none. So, infrastructure and networking and versus applications support. It's a start point I gave them, but I will defer to Josh and to Bob to figure out what really makes sense on splitting the work. So,
And just to waylay some of the fears, I have been training with the engineer in question for the last couple weeks now to get an understanding of how that whole thing works.
super clear.
I've got a pretty good understanding of it.
Good.
So we're not in huge trouble for anything.
And we don't think SPL is going anywhere, but eventually it will. So it'd be foolish of us not to prepare for that day.
Glad I asked.
Glad you asked too.
Chief, I've got a question for you as it relates to the performance evaluation of personnel that, generally speaking, it really doesn't improve performance, as you stated, and particularly for those employees that are happy and content where they're at, i.e. possibly a 25-year engineer,
Seems pretty happy.
20-year firefighter that are just happy being a firefighter, happy being an engineer, happy being a captain. And you're creating a document that is supposed to inspire people to do better based on their performance. You take those points into consideration when you realize that, hey, I'm evaluating somebody that is at the pinnacle of what they want to do and want to be left alone.
Well, I think you're, if I may, I think you're, that's one point, right? You know, is to promote growth in the organization. But secondary to that, you know, as a paramedic, every 2 years, I have to do a refresher and a series of tests to prove that I can still be a paramedic. And in the fire service world, you're promoted to captain in 2000. In 2023, you're still a captain. And I think this new performance process isn't necessarily to drive them towards being a battalion chief, but it will afford us an opportunity organizationally to ensure that the relevant experience and changes to the job description over the years align with where they currently sit in our organization. You know, do they fully comprehend the new mapping software that we've acquired? Do they fully understand the new workers' comp process, things like that? It's just to ensure that maintain proficiency and currency with the job, and to afford an opportunity for folks to align with promotion if that is where they want to go.
If I could add, so the 6 different areas so when I looked at this, I was like, all right, so if traditional performance management methods don't fully capture the essence of this intent-based leadership, what are the criteria we should be evaluating? Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to create an evaluation environment that is contrary to the behaviors that you want people to demonstrate when they're on the job. So if you want them to demonstrate initiative, things like that, then and you're telling them, hey, you're gonna do exactly what I said and do it this way. That doesn't, those two kind of conflict. So what I have is assessment of decision-making skills, measurement of initiative and innovation, evaluation of empowerment and delegation, analysis of communication and collaboration, and feedback from peers and supportness, and assessment of adaptability and learning. So thematically, those are the things that intent-based leadership, if you're gonna run decentralized teams or be part of a decentralized team, those are the broad areas that you need to do. And now, I mean, that's just a list of words, right? So now the thing is, what's a 1 look like? What's a 2 look like? How do they demonstrate that? So, because if someone is a 2 and you want them to become a 3, say, then they need to know how they get from a 2 to a 3. And so going through those, and one of the ways I think about doing is, there's those spider charts where they have, like from the middle, it goes out like a web, and they'll have from 1 in the middle to 6 on the outside on different points. So if you had all those you measure and you have that person rate themselves, and they sit down and have a conversation with their supervisor, have them rate them, and then periodically they get it from their peers to evaluate them, then they get a better look at how they're doing from those different perspectives, and that informs their decisions on how they need to improve. And so actually make it where it has utility, which is hard, because at the same time, you don't want to make it where it needs to be doable. right? It needs to be something that isn't gonna become too much of a burden for the people doing it, has more of a positive conversation. You have to train them about that, because, you know, depending on where you come from, how people do it now in Sedona is based on how they do it because of what they've learned someplace outside of Sedona. And so when we see the differences in how people apply it, then that's kind of the reason why. And one of my sayings I keep going back to is, every organization is perfectly designed for the results it gets. So if we don't help people get on the same page on something that's meaningful and that's tied back into the command and the leadership philosophy that we're trying to empower, and then we wonder why they're going in different directions, well, got to design the system that allowed for that, so.
I would think job satisfaction, regardless of how many years you've been doing the same job, you know, is based on, growth, on being able, on an achievement curve, you know? And
Autonomy, relatedness, and purpose. Yep, those are the three things that matter, and
so
purpose is
exactly.
growth, right? Yeah. Yep, you're absolutely right. I mean, those are the three things everybody wants.
Thank you for that. Okay, risk reduction, I think, community risk reduction,
We're
waiting patiently.
All right, so most notable events and projects in December, we did the Toys for Tots bicycle safety course. We helped close to 100 kids. You can see all the bikes that are pre-assembled in the gym waiting for them to arrive, and our crews rotated through the safety course and helping the kids, even some learning how to ride bikes that had never been on them before, never ridden without training wheels. So overall, it was a pretty awesome day. This past weekend, we did the City of Sedona Winter Play Day, where the city actually provided us with pre-made s'mores in a cone, where we heated them up and served probably close to 400 s'mores in a cone. Mayor Jablo is a fan, stopped by a few times. So
Not all 400, though.
As well as past board members were also sung by Al Camello. And again, it was just a free community event the city has puts on, that their Parks and Rec have continued to extend the invites for us to come and participate, whether we take our own flag and booth, or they'll set something up for us and we can hand out stickers and hats. And we had fire truck Freddie with us, that firefighter Jeremy Vargas is usually the voice of, but we let some of our new guys even do the remote control on him this week. So blasting continues on Forest Road and 179. We've got one blast left for the water tank, and then Forest Road's going to keep continuing, and probably another 10 to 15 blasts, if not more. Today was probably the closest one to the road, and we ended up with minimal debris on it. So things are going really well with that. The uptown parking garage design and conceptual meetings are reinitiated, continuing. So there's a lot of green energy concepts that are being put into the building, with solar, EV charging stations, potentially battery storage, battery energy storage systems, so we're very much on the front end with that. It sounds like they are going to be blasting in the garage too, because it's subgrade as well as above grade. So Kirk and I are really tied into that development process right now, and trying to stay on top of it, especially with battery storage systems and the EV charging stations and known hazards with all of those. Upcoming events, we've got in line with our first quarter initiatives, the software demo from Unicity, which is International Code Council and a I don't know how to call it, but basically they've written a software that's specific for inspections, plan review, community risk reduction in general, and it's built for divisions like ours. So we've got a demo for that coming up to the 18th. I put the wrong date down. It's on Thursday. And then next week also, we've got the 2024 characterization and CRR on the river up in Bullhead City, and then car seat passenger safety technician. So both of those training opportunities have been opened up to our operations crews as well to kind of expand our programs into the field. Being able to take those and then just continue to grow it. It also lines up with not only our first quarter, but kind of our overall overarching goals and initiatives in our division is to make community risk reduction a district-wide program and not just a small niche into which 3 people are in. And totals as far as inspections go, we are seeing kind of an uptick in inspections as well as code consultations. So we're working a lot more closely with developers, and now with the addition of an extra inspector, we have time to actually go out and do more on-site job meetings to get a better purview of the project itself, something that paper doesn't do justice in the city of Sedona or in our district, just based off of elevation and hillside development.
I have a quick question for you on, because this is my education, life safety systems.
So life safety systems are the fire sprinklers, fire alarms, kitchen hood suppression systems, fire pumps, anything that would either initiate based off of a fire or emergency activity that's going to evacuate people, suppress a fire in order to keep it small or to allow people to get out of homes, things of that nature. And they're required to be inspected at different intervals based upon the fire code and the NFPA standards that's associated with them. So the compliance engine, which is a third-party system that the contractors that do these testing submit the documents into there, and then we review each of them for any deficiencies that are potentially known. And of those deficiencies, are they impairments where the system's not going to work properly? So currently, what we're doing with these as we review them, if we haven't been to a property in 3 years, we're initiating a general life safety inspection and going and doing inspections on those in addition to following up on the deficiencies themselves.
Thank you.
So our safety message this week, based off of the dusting that we received last week, as well as the colder temperatures, is just hiking, trying to stay safe as visitors come through, and even locals, because I think we forget, since we only get snow and ice a couple times a year, a short window, that it is a little different than warm weather, but some are also very similar. So making sure your cell phone batteries are charged. Just like in the summer, when it's hot, the batteries don't last as long. When they get cold, they also last, the time decreases. So making sure that those are maintained. Sunscreen, the reflection off of the snow, the ice, the sun's still very strong here, so making sure you wear that. Eye protection, sunglasses, it can be even worse this time of year. Shorter days, so your hiking window with daylight is a lot shorter, so making sure you've got a flashlight or just planning around that. Keeping your water bottle warm, so seems counterintuitive, but making sure that it doesn't freeze, especially if you do end up out there, so keeping it insulated. Dress in layers, making sure you don't get sweaty. You might want to be a little bit cool to start, but that way you have something warm and dry to put on afterwards. And check the conditions just like you would during monsoon season, keeping an eye out for those changes that may be popping up later in the day. Any questions from the board? That's all that I have.
I'd like to bring up a point on your safety message as it relates to batteries. I know for a fact that there was a call to the fire district for assistance. Citizen was with his vehicle and they had a dead battery. And a call came in to the fire station here, and lo and behold, Chief Booth answered the phone, and I mentioned to her that my battery was dead in my car. And seeking assistance, I needed a jump. So, the thought that crossed my mind is, did this warrant her to have an incident number? But it was more just a, assistance. But I do thank you for coming out and giving me a jump, and to add a little bit more pain to the fact that I had to call because I had a dead battery, was the fact that my jumper cables were not in the condition they should have been. So she kindly offered the use of hers, and they worked like a charm. So not only did I have a dead battery, but I had cables that weren't as reliable as I thought. So she got me back on my feet, back in the car, and car started and off I went.
So, to be clear, are you suggesting we enter an invalid or public assist call for that?
There was probably 3 chiefs I called before I called.
Okay. To be clear.
But when she came out, she was like a princess in shining armor. My age. So thank you very much. My wife thanks you because she was in the car and I took it from this side and this side. But needless to say, I have a new battery, new jumper cables, and I am off to the races. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, happy to help.
Okay. With that said, let's see, any other questions or points? Okay, next up is, operational support chief.
Right. Another way to do the battery charging thing, I don't own these companies, but the little jumper boxes that have cold cranking amps and they're super small, you don't even need another car there with you. So let's put it this way, my 19-year-old daughter has one from dad, because it's like, you don't need to ask a stranger, they're really great, so.
That's nice.
So,
You still have to be careful what side you put deposit.
You do.
Okay.
Yeah.
What-
They're pretty self-explanatory now.
What's the formal name of that?
What do you think?
You go to
they're
Google
called,
it?
Jeff?
They're portable battery starters.
Any auto parts store, there's a whole section.
And
Okay.
we're actually,
Costco has ones by Caterpillar right now.
So they have a UL rated because there's a lot of.
correct. Don't buy it at, Dollar General or anything. Get a reputable one. And you don't need a super robust one either. If it's a passenger vehicle you're worried about, you can get easily one full jump out of that that'll start your car for really $150 or something. So it's worth your while. We're actually, it's on my mind because we're getting them for some of our vehicles because we jump a fair amount of vehicles, especially in the canyon.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people come up to Station 5 and say, help me jump my car. So anyway, that's an aside. But further the safety message, a little off point. So the EMS, we've been working, Chief Mazulis and I and our partners in our area and across the state, because there's new House legislation that has gone into effect. I imagine Chief Mazulis has been talking about the implications. What?
Oh, you.
Okay. The implications, similar to many laws that we receive, the law says a thing, and then the rules or the code comes out after, that seems to surprise you because it's not explicit to the law itself. So kind of the application of the law and the implications for this specific House bill, every meeting we attend, we're finding new implications, new potential costs. That's where the GPS tracking, automatic GPS tracking of our ambulances from time of dispatch through fully loaded patient arriving at the hospital. Do that now through a radio transmission, verbally saying, here's how many miles. That's unacceptable as of January 1st, the one that just passed, that January 1st. And the rules meeting was in December. We knew it was coming, but they've been saying, hey, we're giving a sort of a waiver or a variance on different things as we went. So we do have a waiver with the Department of Health Services Bureau of EMS for Arizona, as does every other agency in the Verde Valley for non-compliance, while we all sort this out. Because the good news is we're all trying to attack it, the Verde Valley agencies, the same way. Because we have a singular dispatch center. We don't want to overburden them with multiple products, multiple tracking means. We're trying to And we may benefit from economy of scale with shared costs and things like that too. So we're learning as we go, but it's been a surprise every time we do it. From EMS devices we've never had to carry on the consumable end, all the way to potential, and I think it does impact us, seatbelt changes for existing ambulances, which, and this isn't doomsday, but we can't just have Mike Sheehan in fleet drill in a new bracket for a seatbelt. That has to be to a frame, to a structural component. The side of an ambulance doesn't qualify. So an initial estimate, it could be, for one partner agency, it's about $10,000 to $15,000 per ambulance to retrofit those, which we would have to do out of house and things like that. So we're learning as we go. No action, but it's a revelation every time we go to one of these meetings. So we're hoping there's going to be some changes, though. We'll see. The GPS tracking component leads to another piece within our GIS division and within operations. We're looking at an organization called 3AM Innovations. They have a product called Florian that tracks dismounted and mounted firefighters. So whether the apparatus, it'll also track firefighters on the ground. There's a component that would help with backcountry rescue, wildland fire, things like that. Our partner fire agencies in the Verde Valley are also entering into exploring this company. The good news is this company is one of the vendors that is qualified for a state grant. I can't remember the name of the grant offhand, but I could get it if you want. It's fully funding initiatives like this one, tracking firefighters through the state. They've even been paying for hardware to implement it. So we're trying to see what other people are doing. It'll solve our GPS tracking problem, we think. Passive. The other interesting piece is the state's not even sure how they would receive the data from these GPS tracking devices yet. So we're in a good spot. We're safe. We're complying. But they just don't really know how it's going to look when we get through with it. But we'll be talking more about this 3AM product. There is a grant opportunity that every agency that's applied for in Arizona has gotten, as long as they use this 3AM vendor, because it solves the intent of the grant. Chief Mazulis, Coyle, and I, and Matt Spinelli and GIS have sat through some of the demos of that, trying to figure out which way to go. But there'll be more on that in the future, especially since there's grant. Any questions on those things?
Is the law saying that we need to physically track the location of where you're going, or time markers on when you get there and when you leave and when you?
Right now, it's both and. People are treating it as both and. End to end would be easy. We transport to a handful of hospitals, so we could easily track that just by an odometer, which is how we do it now. They want an active tracking that you can download. Again, none of this is written out quite yet, but that you can download and submit in addition to the data that you're retrieving from dispatch and already submitting.
Yeah.
There's some redundancies there that we're trying to see which way they're going to go. But
well, it's the complexities there, because as Buzz just alluded to, we're an EMS premier agency and we're NEMSIS compliant, which all that means is we already submit all of our data to the state. That data is based on the timestamps from dispatch. Now, if we have a software that doesn't entirely sync with dispatch, the condition exists where once the state figures out how they're going to receive the new data, which they don't have a way yet, we could be submitting 2 sets of data per the statute and they won't match, because dispatch will be 0.4 seconds off of what our thing says. So it's super fun.
And it's doable. we're just not sure yet, and kind of like waiting to see what it's gonna look like before we jump, obviously. We'll see. There are interfacility transport implications, so we've been discussing with dispatch, with the hospital. There's just other pieces within this law that changes the time constraints of when we respond to non-emergency, non-critical transports. And there's other people involved in that to help us comply with it. There's a hospital that may or may not care about what the law says about ambulances. There's a dispatch center that we partner with, so they care, but there's multiple pieces to kind of figure out. And it's early days. They are granting some grace on certain areas within it, but more to come. But the good news is we're doing what they're telling us to. As far as dispatch goes in the communications center, we're going through a wholesale change in the area of our response plans. We're actually, the reason I bring this up as being significant is it's the first time all of our valley organizations, fire departments, and the ambulance company have come together to discuss doing that holistically and caring what the other agency is doing. Because we had, in the past, we would turn in our response plans based on geographic areas and based on the call type. Like we have 24 different response areas defined in Sedona based on whether there's a hydrant, how far it is from a hydrant, if there's a commercial building in that area, and then there's, I think, 12 different call types within each one of those 24. So we all have to write these schemes of who goes to what, how many things, what type of thing, like an ambulance, an engine, a water tender. And we would turn those in and then email it to the other agencies who we think it might impact. They don't want to look at, and I don't know how many, 300 or 400 lines of Excel spreadsheet. So they go, yeah, it looks good. And they turn it in. Well, we're actually sitting at the table and we're sort of workshopping some of the at least the adjoining areas. So Beaverhead Flats Road with Cornville with Montezuma Rimrock. That would be an area that we're going to focus on to make sure it makes sense for the whole area and to make sure we're not sending everyone. Is 1970s way of thinking about the fire service. It just really hasn't come here. Right now with the leadership in the Verde Valley, in the chief ranks, it's like the iron is hot or whatever they and that's for it. So we're jumping at it while we can to make some changes and be at the table. The right people are finally working on it. So it's really, really good. It'll improve service for everyone while thinking about the rest of us, of how to make it happen. We're a little different because we're more of an island. We're a little more separated, but we do have areas and Copper Canyon. That's a piece that's really exciting. And then we have, as far as peer support, our peer support team is having a joint training with Sedona PD, which is great, Prescott, Central Arizona Fire Medical, Prescott Valley PD, and Yavapai County Sheriff's Office are all jointly having a training actually here at the end of the month so that we have peers within the fire service, but we're all peers in public safety. So God forbid something would happen here with YCSO, our team would be trained in the same way, with the same mentality, under the same oversight of the same mental health clinician, and be able to assist the other agencies. Chief Mizoulis and I have gone all over to assist agencies in the past, but it can be really clunky if we're not on the same program. You have to overcome the stigma and overcome their way of doing things as a starter, so it just sets you back when you're trying to do good. This is being set up now with the new program where we're all on the same page, same training, same understanding, and it'll be really great, same policies. And that, actually, the 100 Club of Arizona, they, all those agencies applied for funding, a one-time fund, to help with paying for that training, and we received partial funding. The group got $14,000. So out of that, I think ours was $3,600. help put that training on at really a cost neutral for everyone. So we will have, I believe, 6 or 7 people in it. And then, we'll be joining with those people that we have to work with on the street too. So we'll be able to see eye to eye and have a better understanding. So it's a really great program, all in conjunction with the Start Moving On, who we're contracting with for our in-house, behavioral health and wellness. So it's really how we've wanted it to be, Chief Mazulis and I, since we started with our early days CISM, critical incident.
2007.
And it's finally, like, if that class happens on January 29th, it'll be like the thing finally happened. It's taken that long. So thank you for approving that in the budget, and our folks are using those resources a lot. So it's availability of behavioral health resources for our whole organization. So, any questions on any of that?
Thank you. Chief?
Jordan's report. Jordan is wrestling pigs in Denver. He's now gone out of state and gone rogue. Sounds really cold.
Yeah, really cool.
So as he mentioned before, just to follow up, annual training plan is out to crews and adopted. The Verde Valley has adopted some form of it with some slight modifications to meet their specific organizational needs, but we saw the fruits of that labor last week. We did a regional extrication training at the Cottonwood Training Center, and Verde Valley had apparatus there all day working with our guys, and it's good because there's a lot of new folks across all agencies, so they got to know each other and then got to know each other's equipment. So when we arrive on scene at Cornville Road and Beaver Head Flats, they know where the other agency's equipment is and how to use it. So it's one example of many things to come. And then again, OSHA and ISO mandated training requirements are out there. That's all the super exciting stuff. He's opened a Pandora's box with some of our training documents in Lexipol, but it's going to become the model on how we continue to migrate the rest of our pile. And continuing to work on the new battalion chief position task book, and pumping his brakes on this one because we've got all new freshly minted battalion chiefs, but also we all have 3 new freshly minted battalion chiefs. So the opportunity is now for them to tell us, hey suckers, you didn't explain this to me, that I was supposed to know this, and it's fresh in their mind. And so we get fresh perspective, and you know, they're all 10-year guys. Waffle's been here 5 or 10 years. Yeah, and it's great because they're also in an environment working with Chief Coyle and Chief Baker where like they don't filter their feedback, which I think is critical. And they're like, yeah, you didn't tell me this, Chief, you know, and and so it's been good. And then we hosted our last ISO class at Sedona Fire.
Oh, that was such a close one.
So it's we didn't fully recognize the agency lift to make these federal classes happen, and we're reevaluating the value right now, and up to and including the instructor getting the dates wrong, but it's good. And then continuing to work on the captain's position task book to have it ready and minted for the coming year. So among 100 other things Jordan's working on. My turn. All right, so that year to date, that end of year is off by 53 calls, if I'm not mistaken. So we hit it. This was a record year for us, over 5,000 calls. It's the first, and I expect the trend to continue. And our guys are just getting out the door and doing the job. Next. Yes.
Rather than waiting to the end, how is that going with our staffing? Because that's a huge jump in calls. You know,
it's a good jump, and we've been evaluating that. You know, we've pulled the data looking at ambulances, for example, ambulance usage, and there's a few days of the week and hours of the day where we're out of or really close to being out of ambulances, and something we're going to keep a close eye on, because Buzz alluded to it with some of the new legislative changes that are coming down the pipe, and then some that were introduced last week. It could shift the need on how they manage ambulance usage in the state of Arizona. So right now we're doing well. And then it depends on growth at, towards Cottonwood, what the city decides on with what they're going to do around the sewer treatment plant. And we're keeping eyes on all of that stuff. But right now, crews are doing a really good job managing the calls. And then our statistics month, and I'm not breezing over it, but I do want to do a little more deeper dive on station updates. So, purchases over 10,000. That was our staffing plan, that's our personnel management software. And then the recruiting was for the radio technicians. And Swift Group, I just lost it. Turnouts, that's right.
That was the final 3 turnouts for new recruits. Initial group that got hired, I had to do a secondary purchase. We had 2 fallout, I had to do a secondary purchase. The 10,000 is sets of bunkers.
And then there's the thank yous, but I'm gonna cover station updates. So I met with Slide Rock State Park last week, and short story is a gentleman up there by the name of Hank was a park ranger. He was then selected as the Slide Rock State Park director, and then recently selected to be the Northern Arizona Regional Parks director. And I think I just butchered the title, but he's got 10 parks now. And I met with him 8 months ago, and the operations director for the park. As per the park, they had some changes in management, as they do frequently. And Hank reached out to me a couple months ago and said, hey, we got to meet on this Station 5 thing. So we met. And the short version is they're very interested in working with us to get a station going. The state has the State Lake Investment Fund and statutory requirements that say they can't gift, sell, or allow for use of state park land other than for the public, is a short version. However, anecdotally, we talked about a couple ways we don't get gifted land. And one example, I said, could we buy an acre next to some park in Tucson and give it to you guys, and that'd be good? Yes, technically. The other thing is, they believe to be the case is in the event they identify infrastructure needs that state park properties in Sedona proper, they could value what land we would need to build the station, and then we could facilitate infrastructure improvements at Slide Rock, for example. So the cool part of that is say they need a water line upgrade, there's going to be water line work that needs to get done if we put in a station. So it would be mutually beneficial. So where we landed is the staff at Slide Rock State Parks evaluating kind of a needs assessment of what would qualify as infrastructure stuff that could be in kind. And then our GIS guru is doing some as-built mapping of Slide Rock State Park to determine how much dirt we would have to eat up to provide for a station at Slide Rock. Once that's completed, we'll formalize the process. And the way I understand it is there's kind of an oversight committee with state parks, and then it goes to the state parks board, and then there's some legislative stuff that happens. But point is moving forward to a yes or no in a much more rapid fashion than I expected. So that will be a continued update monthly till we come to a resolution. So some of the things that were brought up was, say it all works and we build a station, how do we relinquish the piece of the property we currently have at Station 5? And I'm working on those answers. I'm hoping to have something that'll be an interesting process, because while the dirt is co-owned by us and another entity, as is the structure, but the structure's one structure, so I'm working on it. I don't know how that would work. Yeah, well, just big saw. So more to come on that. That's a complex opportunity that it's kind of fascinating to me, because how do you unwind that? So it'll be interesting. Now, Station 4, again, Matt put together some drawings showing how we would preserve parking spaces in the upper uptown parking lot. 4 versions. It was interesting enough to the city. We're meeting tomorrow to discuss what next looks like. So I won't have anything till next month, but that too is moving forward. And I'm excited because it feels like something's happening. So go.
That's great with both stations, forward and.
It sure, but then what if there's a window of opportunity where it has to launch at the same time? That's where I'll be having a lot of phone conversations with Gabe. How do we do this? But you know, when I walk in the property up at Slide Rock, there's really no public vantage point to the station, so I would envision more of a utility station than an architectural, you know, something that's going to go on the front page of Architectural Digest. But I would imagine Station 4 that the city would have some asks, but we'll move forward with that as we do. And that's the station update. Any questions?
Includes your presentation there,
Yes.
right?
Any questions?
Okay, thank you. And that brings us to the next item on the agenda. Oh, you, but I don't see it on this page.
Your course.
Okay,
The top over here.
okay, it's on this one. Thank you. Okay, I got it. Discussion, possible action, review, and possible sign of memorandum of understanding for Local 3690 and ASEA. Steve?
Yes, so not unlike the audit, the MOU is impacted by board-approved changes in July. And a few of those changes required further conversation about language, adoption, and implementation of the things approved in July. The rank for rank staffing, some of the benefits changes, vetting it with legal, vetting it with the state. And then in addition to that, there were some changes federally to our contribution plans that modified the intent of what we agreed to in July. So that's why it's coming to you in January. But both the ASEA contract and the 3690 contracts were sent out, modified, and vetted by the labor reps, and then went to Keona for final edit, and they're now before you. And I apologize for not doing a then-now summary. In looking back and at the suggestion of a board member, that would have been a fantastic tool to include with this. But it's been so much a part of every day, every week discussion, and it was based on board approved stuff. So in my brain, I was like, oh yeah, they're tracking, and I forget that outside of the board, you're enjoying retirement and or working, and so my apologies. And if further read and review, so all things included in the MOU are implemented and positively impacting staff. So if it's the board's pleasure to spend more time to review the document and come back to sign it next month, I completely understand and own it.
I do have a couple questions as I reviewed it, as perhaps maybe the other board members do also. 2 points that I wanted to bring up is that in the education part, we had a standard of comparative pricing per unit that would go with the 3 state schools that we have here. And it looks like that may have been changed or is considered being changed for a national standard.
If you're referencing the associate's degree at Yavapai College, and then the bachelor's degree, I believe, is all the state universities.
Right, it was
Yeah.
NAU, ASU, and U
U of A, and that was modified, and that was language I took from, it was prior to me being involved, language that I thought was navigated between Chief Troutwine and the board, and
Not to my recollection, but are we considering a national standard? And if so, what are the prices? Where's the matrix that shows that to be a desirable change?
you were kind of,
So
he worked with Keon on this a lot, so.
that standard, when I asked Keon about it, they were very close, that national number that she's at, that she has in there. I'm not certain why that changed. I don't have any history on that. I do know it's easier to get that number because you go to a website and we'll have that national average. And, you know, I don't know where that change came from, though. I apologize. I don't.
You know, I was given the impression that was what was negotiated, and clearly you don't recall it, so that's something we can evaluate and modify.
I'd like to see a little bit more in-depth look at that.
Okay.
Even if the language is such that, you know, both are considered and whichever is the lesser of the two, you know, perhaps we could manipulate that kind of language into there. That was the one question I had on that. The other question I have has to do with the grievance process as it pertains to reaching the level at which the board becomes involved. And as I look across this board, there's but one person on this board that's been through an administrative hearing. And it is something that we're not as trained as one should be, that when they go into that sort of thing. And there is an option to if reviewed and it is worthy of moving on to a state board, of state administrative hearing board at that level, the option of having that is not in here. And so I don't know if that means that we have to look at the disciplinary procedure that allows the governing board to make that kind of decision, or if we have to create language with legal to implement it into the MOUs.
I'll research that and get an answer for you, because my assumption is that it would be in a county special taxing district. There might be a county level. If there's nothing with the county, I'll just double confirm it.
Well, we could go for an administrative judge, but there's 3 different ways we do it. One is we could have it where you are the arbitrator, or the ones that hears the grievance, so we do it a step lower in the organization. And then I think if I correct Dave, that the issue is that we don't want to do it the way we did it before. I mean, it was messy, it was public, it was not objective. I shouldn't say it wasn't objective. It was difficult for you guys to have objective information to be able to evaluate for it without giving someone, without frankly embarrassing even the person that asked for it in a public way. And, yeah, I'll have to look back.
The statutory on this.
Yes, you did.
The only statutory I did this time, and the recommendation strongly on that one was to, if it gets this level, get it out into the administrative, the board.
Okay,
Get an administrative law judge, get out of it.
so we'll modify that language.
It's something that, I could ask Bill, how many boards have gone through that, and you could probably show it all on one hand, have gone through an administrative hearing. And the way the open meeting process is, there truly isn't a way to have the final ruling come out in other than the public. And so, I would like the option or the opportunity to came to our level to have it moved to those who are best trained for that.
I agree, and it could be, obviously, it's infrequent, and, and then it'd afford you the opportunity to look at it and say, whoa, this is a big one, let's kick it up, or, okay.
Not any more involved with that particular, scenario. I think that language needs to be implemented in this. And so the ability to table the approval of this or approve it with modifications.
I would, my preference would be that it's tabled so that we can get the language correct, because then modifications are ripe for mistakes.
That pretty much the.
Let me give you a red line version too.
Yes, please,
Yeah,
that would help.
So with that being the case, the ability to, review and possible sign of memorandums of understanding for ASEA and Local 3690, will be tabled until next meeting.
Understood.
Any other input on that?
And I just want to clarify, again, this doesn't impact anything we're doing with our employee group or anything. Everything's been implemented, so there's nobody's waiting on anything because of this.
Any other comments? Okay, that brings us to the final item on the agenda, which is board member items. Discussions, board members, fire district related activities since the last board meeting. And I'll start on my right this time with Scott.
Okay, since I haven't been around for a while.
You've been on vacation.
Yeah, but something came up, speaking to a citizen, who was concerned about the insurance of the building that she's working in. And I thought, well, then what are you talking about? She said, well, I heard that all these places around here, because they're so close to the forest, the rates are not being covered by insurance companies. And I thought, well, that's really not anything that should come in here, but there was some, things that allude to, they say, well, why can't, the district fix that? And I said, well, you don't go fixing it, that's the insurance.
Helen and I got an answer to that last week. It was
Hear about that?
super in depth. No, so every insurance company in at-risk states, whether it's Florida or Arizona, have exponentially raised their rates. There are people not being offered renewals, and there's no plan, formally.
And Dory will have a piece of this too. The Wildland Fire Policy Committee that I'm on for the Western Fire Chiefs Association, California was kind of the canary in the coal mine, if you will, for this. They put laws in place that said that people had to be insured if they were gonna be in the state at all. So several large insurance companies just left the state because they could not be underwritten. So now that's starting to happen here. There's a bunch of different issues associated with it. It's a big deal. I mean, it is the biggest problem that I see on the horizon in the next 5 years, is figuring out how to do that, because there's no incentive for mitigation work. There's no way to track that mitigation work. And as fire seasons get worse and their losses go higher, insurance companies, they're just, especially when they can't be underwritten, they're just gonna leave. I don't know, Dory, anything else to add to that?
I mean, if you watch the nightly news, like, in general, they've had several nights this past week, whether it's 3 on Your Side, and they've started picking up coverage in terms of what's happening in it, and the fire marshals associations are in the same boat. We're seeing communities, I mean, talking with some of the realtors, for example, here, they've lost home sales and business sales because they can't get insurance or having loans. So it's very much a thing. And it depends on how integrated you want legislation in the back pocket of insurance companies. And like Chief Coyle said, legislation got involved in California, and the result was insurers pulling out of the state. So with Arizona being one of the few states in the Southwest that doesn't require insurance carriers to provide incentives for home hardening and everything else, we have to be very careful about how it's portrayed and pushed through the legislation on what they wanted to get done.
But the good news is that speaking with the Department of Forestry and Fire Management last week, I didn't get an indication that our legislatures has this on the radar right now. Would that be accurate? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's all I have.
Super. Thank you. That's it? That's all? Just a big one. Just one big one.
Then the usual, signing checks and doing bills and things. As the chief alluded, and I said something about, I was at AFTA last week. The interest, and I learned a lot, only went to one of the statutories because I'd done them before, but I went to the HR statutory. But the one that was really interesting to me, and I'm looking at you, Buzz, because it's an EMS one, and it may or may not be affecting us, but they weren't talking about the GPS tracking at all. They were talking about the hospitals getting a certificate of need and running their own ambulance.
Certificate of operation.
Sorry, certificate of.
Yep.
Correct, that's, if, the, Chief Lewis and I were just looking at this, so there's a new House bill proposed. So, it's, I don't know, I think it's moving though.
Yeah.
That anyone, but it's under the guise of a hospital, can come into an existing certificate of necessities holders area. So we sort of own the right to have EMS in our area, including interfacility transports, which is commonly misunderstood among operations. We would have to say, please come and do an interfacility in our area for someone to come out. Relinquish on a case-by-case basis, right now. This, and we generate quite a bit of revenue from interfacility transports. You know, it's a lot. So, and an interfacility is hospital to hospital. It's not home to hospital, just so it's a different type of transport, so non-emergency typically. So, anyone can make up a new ambulance company, if you will, out of a hospital, NAH, or actually, it could be University of Arizona out of Tucson. And they can come in here, file for a certificate of operations.
Yeah, $50.
And the criteria for it is, like, we want to, we should be able to. It is like super vague. Where a CON, it's very rigid, very difficult to take over a CON, as we're seeing with many of our fire partners. So it is a concern. It would change the game here financially, certainly. But it's still somewhat early days. Legislation, Ed can give some editorial maybe about who's backing it.
Well, your colleagues were all hyperventilating about it and the revenue impact of it.
Especially from a district standpoint, who has an existing CON, like, we're kind of like unicorns.
Well, and
it would be a revenue, it's a disaster as far as revenue.
And it's a history repeats itself moment. If there's a classic indie film, Mother Jugs and Speed with Bill Cosby, and it's essentially about the private ambulance infighting in Southern California in the 70s, and I just envision, say NAH became aggressive with it, and then they found people to hire for those positions, and then they came down here and did our interfacilities. My feeling is that it would be it's working right now, but we'll quickly pull the plug so that, like, it could last for a year. We completely change our operational tempo, and then it evaporates, and then we got to quickly figure it out again. Or we could have another U of A or some private come in, and it could be shorter lived, 2, 3, 4 months at a time. They rent a hotel just so they have an AMBO here to do interfacilities, and then again disrupts our operations, and then we have to clean up the scraps when it doesn't work for them. Because when we went through this with it was a 2012, engineer Mian Zarita wrote a white paper on Sedona Fire's ambulance. And the bottom line is it proved that while we do have a substantial call volume, we don't have a call volume that would provide for enough revenue for it to make sense to have a private ambulance company here. Private ambulances averaged 1.5 ambulances staffed in town. to make it a revenue generator, whereas we have 4. So we're eyes on it. It's, you look at the sponsors of the bill, it tells you who's supporting it, and, we'll see.
Thing too, that doesn't have a, like a CON, they wanna know that you're in it for the long term. Not just, this has a real mercenary poaching sense to it that doesn't speak, at the initial, the only one we had was redlined all over. It was 4 pages of definitions and 2 pages of law, very simply written, but it doesn't have like that sustainability, like, are you gonna serve this thing, this community, this area for long? It doesn't really say that you have to prove that so
So
far.
it's like the GPS, the law.
Yeah.
The cool part is I saw it today, today was the first day I read it, that the existing bill that I was speaking to earlier, it has parameters and tightening of response times for non-critical transports that would be pretty hard for someone to say, hey, we're operating out of Prescott and we're gonna get there and handle all these. They would have to like move in, and then it's not a sustainable model. I don't know how they could prop up an entire organization on how many facilities we do, unless they were allowed freedom to be later in the response, you know, like take more time responding. So one bill is saying, hey, hurry up and get there, and we're like, ooh, can we? How are we gonna apply? How are we gonna handle this response time component? The other one says, come on in and take them, you know, so I don't know how they're gonna, if they're gonna work against one another too in the final iteration.
They do it all the time in California.
Yeah.
Well, but here, they're saying thou shalt show up
Yeah.
in this much time, and it's actually in the law now, where currently it's not. We negotiate all the time with the hospital saying, we're trying, we'll get there, as long as we call you, are we still cool? And we do that like on a case-by-case basis, and then a large yearly meeting when we hash it out. This one says you will show up. The current law, new law that they're proposing, it doesn't speak to any of that yet. And a certificate of operation is vastly different than a CON, which may speak to how the ease of getting it. I don't know. It's a very thin law so far. So.
So anyway, I found it very interesting, and,
Yeah, I could see people, it's concerned. I know Verde Valley Ambulance Company, Buzz's opinion, so maybe not Sonoma Fire, I don't know that Verde Valley Ambulance would be an ambulance company without interfacilities, because it's a hand-to-mouth operation as it is.
a lot of the
It would
districts
kill
were
them.
saying that.
It would kill at Verde Valley Ambulance, so Dave Guth, the chief there, is very concerned. He's the one that put it on our radar. It wasn't on any of our legislative dockets.
Just popped out, it was introduced January 10th, so it was right at conference.
Yeah, it popped up, because chiefs groups look at that, and they're always staying abreast of it, so. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. It's a real thing, maybe, I don't know.
Anyway,
But you got,
Call your state house.
out of 5, you guys are bringing all kinds of joy to the, board.
Yeah. Chairman Soto, do you have any?
Anna, do you have anything for us?
Well, along with, the bill paying, I, along with the mayor, got some, calls from neighbors in our little part of the neighborhood about Eagle Vista Way. So they have, okay. And the the portion of the red curb outside of the gate and the signs that have gone up.
Yes, we have. Inspector Riddell has been working diligently with this. The curbing is required, based on turnarounds, where the gate is, the fire hydrant that is located down there. We've looked at it, how it's painted currently, it's within code. The code does not give a specified, but we have looked at it, it's being investigated.
But you did not go down and paint the curb.
Negative.
They did it, and then asked you if it was in compliance.
This is a common scenario on public-private streets, especially when gates are put in place, dynamics change in a neighborhood. So it's very well within its right to be painted based off of gates, hydrant locations, and everything of that nature. We do not paint curbs. We can tell people when to paint them, but they also, when there's development in areas, many of the developers know when curbs are supposed to be painted. We have investigated it. It's righteous in how it has been put in place.
Signed as well.
Same way you would for,
The same as we would for any other private street, public street. At this point, from a code perspective, it is okay.
Thank you.
Lori, anything for us?
So I had, the opportunity to meet with, Chief Mazulis, and that was, very informative, talking about some of the things that just come up in our sharing here. And, I would say, little more time than normal with, reviewing for getting ready for the board because of reviewing the MOU, the board handbook, and, other pieces. So, was good.
Thank you. And then lastly, first of all, just a couple of thank yous for your staff, putting together this whole policy review thing. That creating something out of nothing is not easy, especially with the complexity of what this is. So,
I physically saw the switch flip in Kim's brain, and she came up with a plan. I was like,
perfect. Well, she has the right personality for a project like this. She'll go at it until it's done, I'll tell you. So thank you for that, for all the hard work on that. The audit, this is years of audits to get us to a point where we had just a few opinions to fix things or adjust things, down to a point where, hey, we got away without any problems. And here we are now consistently going through an audit with zero to minimal issues that we need to address. So thank you for keeping us in the black and not in the red, because that's a lot of work, especially with personnel changing over the years. We did attend a social event. The board had an opportunity to get together without any fire district business and just enjoy each other's company at a dinner hosted by Janet and her husband, Scott, which was outstanding. We had a great time. So thank you very much. Scott, you missed a good one.
Sorry.
And then lastly, my involvement with the department, the district, actually was as explained, between Dory and I, and it was very professional, yet it was personal because of our friendships. So thank you very much. And if there's anything else from anyone else, this meeting is now adjourned.